All right, so how this is going to work today is I am going to kind of share my screen. Unless you're a control freak, I will totally let you take over the screen and you can present. But if not, I can click for you. And I linked everyone's presentation to this last little game piece on the roadmap. So if you go to each of the different chapters and you go to the Get Ready to Present little chip, you can see all of the different presentations from each of the different groups. So while you're working on your individual project, you are able to use these resources, use these roadmaps to help you on that portion of the class. And we'll talk more about that at the end of the session. So are we ready for chapter 3 with interactive video?
Let's do it, Stephanie. I think we're ready.
Let's go ahead, Ryan. Take it over.
Okay, Deborah, do you want me to start? I guess that's a yes. So we had chapter 3, interactive video methods. So I know a lot of you teachers are pretty familiar with using this, but this chapter really broke it down in terms of how to make it effective. And there's a piece called the effect score, which I thought was really interesting. And it also breaks down some other examples and some resources you guys can utilize. So the first thing is the effect size, which before this book, I had no idea what effect size was. I thought obviously it's going to be an effect on something, but I had no idea what the 0.54 even meant. So I did some research on that. So I was super interested in how high the level of the interactive video method was. So when looking at the effect size, there's 6 different categories that the gentleman that did this study contributed to learning. So you have on the left-hand side, the student, the home, the school, the curriculum, the teacher, and the teaching and learning approaches. So interactive, and this is all effect on visual learning. So the interactive video method is actually pretty high on the spectrum of effect size. The number 1 being collective teaching efficiency, and then I just put them just some random ones out there: classroom discussion, evaluation, reflection, and then interactive video method falls right there in the middle with 0.54, and then it even goes into the negatives of boredom and ADHD. So with the interactive video, it can be extremely effective if done in the right way. So question 1 is, what should you consider before you implement the interactive video into your classroom? Number 1, I think this is the most important, is what is the academic outcome that you want to achieve for your class? I know I've witnessed some ed puzzles that some teachers have created, and I can even attest to this in the past. I've used ed puzzles just sort of as like a time filler. But you have to think about, what do you want your kids to accomplish? Number 2, what are the technology tools that you want to use? Not only what program do you want to use, but what do you have available for your class? And also, how are you going to present it to your kids? Number 3, the size of the video matters. They said in this chapter, the most effective videos are anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes, because if we go a little bit longer, the kids' engagement and understanding is going to go down. So you want to keep it anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes, and then that time is going to be extended if you incorporate the interaction without the video. Also, question with purpose. We are looking for questions that are higher level thinking questions, and that's what really makes it so high. If they are not higher level thinking questions, the interactive video method can actually drop down in terms of the effect size. Number 5, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but you can present the interactive videos in 2 ways, either show and tell or tell and show. And we'll explain that, and it's pretty straightforward. Question number 2 really talks about what happens if your video fails. And this really brings it back to our last class that we took. I really wish someone would have told me this in our first year, that mistakes are ultimately feedback. So if you fail with your first interactive video, if you fail with any lesson, or if you really just fail with anything in life, you have two ways to go about it. You can either run with it, or you can learn from your mistake. So ask yourself 3 things. Why did you fail? retrace those steps, and then also mistakes equals data. And that's something I need to really go back and look at, not only for interactive videos, but for life in general, because I know many times I failed with my month-old son. You guys can probably hear in the background, but mistakes are feedback. So there's the first two questions. Deborah, do you want to answer number 3 and 4?
Sure. So question number 3, it says articulate the difference between show and tell and show, which is kind of what Ryan had alluded to in the last section of his question. How are they alike, or when are they appropriate? So show and tell is when you would show a video of some sort, and then the students would give responses, and reflect on the information given. And tell and show is just the opposite of that. It says the teacher initially tells the teacher through other things, maybe direct instruction, whatever, and then the students will, kind of answer prompts, and then they go back and kind of reflect on it with a video to see if you kind of got that, if they got the answer right, or if they're going in the right direction. So question 4 is, what are the inherent obstacles present in station rotation model? They gave a great example of this, and essentially it is if you have too many technologies at once. The example they gave, a woman was trying to use 3 or 4 different technologies that were all new to the students, and so it just bottlenecked the stations, and then she had to keep going back and interacting with all the groups when she was trying to work on her own group. So she was pulled in a lot of directions. And again, as Ryan alluded to, the students get very impatient. They lose their, their concentration and what they're supposed to do. To overcome the obstacles, he suggested using the ideal rotation design, which is having an interactive video, which again is 2 to 3 minutes long. And then having a teacher-led instruction group, and then having a group where there's collaborative activities for the students to do. So there were 2 protocols that were given to us. One is called the scoop, where you would play a passage while the students listen, and then the students would retell the passage to a partner. They could do that either, just orally, or they could maybe screencastify, and then they would listen to the passage again, which would allow the students to then self-reflect and so an example with that would be, students could use the scoop in 2 station rotations. One station would be the interactive video, where they'd listen to a video on Edpuzzle or someplace, and then a collaborative station would be where students could record their knowledge of what they learned through that. And the next protocol is sketch and tell, and that is where you have one source, you have one slide, and you explain what you learned by drawing, or you explain with a drawing, and then you write about it. So students could listen to direct instruction lesson, and then they could use sketch and tell on a class Google slide to show what they know or learned.
So here's the goal, the strategy, and the tools. So really, ultimately, the goal is, you're trying to introduce the interactive video. But here's what would be an example. By the end of watching this video, kids should be able to comprehend or understand this subject matter by answering these questions, or at least have, a basic understanding. And that could be used from any subject matter. So how do you achieve this goal? You have the kids obviously watching the video, and you have to incorporate these higher level thinking questions that go along directly with the video. The best thing to do and how to accomplish this is make sure that we are pre-watching the video and pre-place the questions in an appropriate spot. I know you have to do this in order for it to make it interactive, or else it just wouldn't make any sense. And then you can approach it in 2 different ways, the show and tell versus the tell and show. But ultimately, we have to focus on what do the kids want to achieve. We're going to go on the next slide over like 2 more, but there's a bunch of resources out there and a bunch of tools for making interactive videos right there that Stephanie put up for you. And I honestly just typed in on Google interactive video methods, and there was like 1 million that popped up. And there's a lot of these are free, especially if you're a teacher. And there's just little things that make, Edpuzzle and YouTube editor, just a little bit different from one another. So there's a number of examples and a number of programs that you can use as a teacher that's free. So if you want to go back to that last slide there, Stephanie. Yeah. So here's the basic framework. Is, make sure, once again, you're identifying the desired outcomes, and we have the 3 different standards, whether it be, elementary, middle, or high school. Make sure that goal aligns with the strategy. Choose your tools, and the best way to do this is with the, or at least I think, or one of the options is station rotation, and then also, again, focus on the relevance and the rigor. But I think the most important thing is just focus on your academic goals and make sure you use it correctly.
Nice job. If you have questions, feel free to come off mute or type them into the chat as I'm getting ready for the next chapter. Great job, guys. I love how you kind of introduced video and just talking about using Edpuzzle and YouTube. And we do have the premium version of Edpuzzle. So if you need help with that, feel free to reach out to your instructional technology coordinator or coach, and we are more than happy to help you set that up.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks.
Are there any questions, Scott or Angie?
None are in the chat, so it looks like we are good to go on to chapter 4.
All right, so chapter 4, you get to see Mike's nice background.
All right, go ahead, go to the next slide. It's Shannon, you want me to start? Shannon on here? I think she is. All right, this was Shannon and I's presentation. We worked on, it was a lot of stuff with Socratic seminar, Socratic discussion with digital tools kind of stuff. And Socratic is something that's really near and dear to my heart. So effect size was a 0.48. When integrated with fidelity, you acquire a year's growth in a year's time. And so you can't stress enough about the fidelity piece. A lot of people, when they start getting into the discussion stuff, and they get kind of frustrated early, and so they don't stick with it. And so it's something you got to do on a regular basis. The more you do it with Socratic seminar, the more kids get into the habit of being very comfortable discussing, and the easier it is to reach those higher levels with the rigor and relevance. Next slide. Okay, so our first question was, reflect on the practice and the practice of others in your building. Are your students experiencing mind-numbing 300 to 400 questions per day that the average teacher dispenses? If so, how do we shift from high volume, low rigor questioning to fewer questions that strategically drive students thinking through multiple levels of condition? And so one of the first things I think you need to do is you need to start looking at things like Bloom's taxonomy of questions and relevance questions. Like if you're doing any kind of close reading, a lot of times, especially for your higher levels, you can have them start looking at text to text, text to self, text to world, where you're making comparisons between another piece of writing, the world as they understand it, the text to self, and then the text to world, how they understand the world they live in. And so the more they start doing that, that begins to kind of help how it's related to their world. The big thing the chapter talked a lot about was pre-planning of questions. And when you're doing any kind of Socratic discussion, your pre-planning of questions is key. You can't just wing it. I think that was one of the things they talked about in the chapter. And when you design those well-built questions where you have like a combination of like fact and recall basic questions, which a lot of us do naturally, we just ask comprehension type stuff, see if they understood it. To get to that next level, you've got to kind of build on that a little bit, and then you start throwing those higher order questions in with evaluation, synthesis, and then you start making it relevant to their life. Then you're getting into quadrant D more often than you would think. And then technology, things like Google Documents, Jamboards, chart paper, EduProtocols, that sort of stuff. Next slide. Question 2 is, it's critical that questions address multiple levels of cognition. What action steps can you take to make sure that happens each and every day? It's one of the simplest and most important changes we can make in our practice to supercharge the rigor in our classroom. So when pre-planning questions, here again, really know what you want to ask. Be sure to reference the Bloom's taxonomy and depth of knowledge chart in order to ensure you are reaching multiple levels of cognition. And so it doesn't matter what technology tool you use. if you don't have these pre-built questions together, it really hurts what you're trying to do. You're not going to get as much as what you want. Remembering and understanding type of questions create one type of answer with not much type of depth of discussion. A lot of times if you're trying to do a discussion and you ask a fact and recall question, there's not a lot of debate with it. And so you've got to really ask those questions that are open-ended. The what if type of questions, how would you relate to this character, that type of stuff. The analysis and evaluation questions are going to ensure more discussion and thoughtful responses. I put a couple links in here, and there I think we've seen a lot of these before. This was just the revised level of Bloom's. It's got verbs as well as question stems, and I think for a lot of us, the question stems are the key. I think the more you can look at, if you're struggling with those types of questions, the more you can start to build off those question stems, the more natural those higher level questions get to be asked. And then the depth of knowledge, I thought was a good one to kind of throw in there as well. And so it's got DOK 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so we saw this a couple years ago, I think. They were real big with this. I think Brian Seymour was presenting a lot of this. These types of question stems are going to really help you to develop that rigor and the relevance piece. Just kind of some resources to kind of help you a little bit. Next slide. Shannon, are you here?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Okay.
For our question 3, it was just what's your stance on cold calling on kids in class, whether it's ineffective, effective, ineffective, and how do you know? We kind of took this as a pros and cons because there are some good things about cold calling, and then the book talked about some things that aren't so good. Obviously, a pro is that it ensures all students are participating because they don't know if they're going to get called on or not. At the elementary level, we use something called equity sticks, or I do anyway. It's through Wit and Wisdom. And Mike uses popsicle sticks in his classroom, where I let my kids know after we read this passage, I'm using those equity sticks so that they're focused and paying attention. You can differentiate the questions you're going to be asking when you pull their names. And it forces the students to be seen, all of the students can be seen as strong students through that differentiation. Cons is the anxiety I think it causes in a lot of kids. I'm one of those people. I don't like to be called on if I'm not prepared. Once the students have participated, they kind of check out because they know their name's already done. And it can lead to inauthentic learning, basically. They don't learn the language that they need when they're doing a Socratic seminar. So there's good and bad as far as cold calling. And question number 4, explain why pre-planning questions can be described as a short-term pain, long-term gain. You only have to do it once, and then you can kind of tweak your questions year after year. And you can have the different levels of questioning. It gives you a way to make sure you're having a good variety. So it makes your planning more effective because you can be reused. Do you want me to keep going?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Our EDGE protocols that we had to work on were Buka Chaka. We both kind of felt it was more of a wrap-up activity more than to do something like a culminating activity, I guess. The second one was protocol number 2, the group brainstorm. And I think we both liked it better because it just felt like it was easier to change it to make it work for primary and secondary. And you could have, I don't know, we just liked it better. Solve a problem, evaluation, analysis questions that led itself to multiple ways to solve through the group brainstorms. I don't know, Mike, do you want to jump in there? Because my EDGE protocol was for the brainstorm was getting the kids to talk.
Yeah.
In second grade. So Mike's was a little more in depth than mine was.
I think the Buka Chaka, we tried something similar to that with the 8th graders this past year, where we were doing, we did something with Fahrenheit 451 and Gibber, where they went through and they had slides for each section of the book, and it felt more scripted than anything. And so I kind of started it. I didn't really like it as much, but I think for independent reading, the Bukachaka really looks like it's got a lot of versatility. You can do a lot of differentiation with it, and it kind of build as you go with the text evidence. The group brainstorm I thought was a little more flexible to everything you can do. You could do 2 short stories. You could do a poem to an informational text, 2 pieces of informational text, a chapter in a book. It just gave a lot more flexibility to what you wanted to do, and it fit more with what I understand as Socratic discussion. The Bukachaka was almost too big unless you were like chunking the book a little bit. I just thought the group brainstorm might be a little more flexible to what you wanted to do with discussion. And some of the digital tools we thought about was Jamboard, Pear Deck, and then I know Shannon said she used the Chatterbox, the Scoop, Learning in the Round, and I tried a little bit with the digital this year because I had one virtual class, the digital breakout rooms, and so I was a little nervous about that at first, but I had just a couple of digital breakout rooms, and I know some people have said it's kind of hard to monitor. I had a really good group, and so if they did something wrong, I didn't hear about it, but that is a concern with the digital breakout rooms as well. So, and then we kind of broke down the examples in 2 areas. I actually took a Socratic discussion I'd already made. So if you click on the teenage Socratic discussion questions, so this was a sample of what I've done. And I just kind of, if you look here, I just kind of went down through in parentheses, and I was looking at different levels of blooms and then looking at relevance. And so I kind of put different things in the margins to how it related to different parts of blooms and rigor and relevance. And so it's just kind of a blueprint to kind of think about. Some of it's going to be fact and recall, and I think you need to have that just to build that base a little bit. Okay, going back. And then the 2 articles, you don't have to click on those, but those were where the questions came from. There were 2 articles with it. And then the Edu protocol, the group brainstorm. And I looked at the sample that you had in there, and I kind of liked that, but then I also liked the one we did in class, and so I kind of varied it up. If you go to slide 4, slide 4 was this, everybody answers it, and then when you go to slides 5 through, I think it's 11, I had the kids answer like 4 out of the 6 questions is what I was thinking, so they wouldn't have to respond to every question for Socratic, but if you got a group of 4 or 5 students, it's likely all these questions are going to get hit. And then at the very end, you had a group question where you kind of do a closing question with it. When we had done Socratic, we always did like an opening statement, like a general question, and then we kind of did a follow-up question at the end to kind of see how the learning kind of furthered, did it change, that kind of stuff. And the questions in between kind of guided towards those ways of thinking. And then the Bukachaka, I just came up with one for independent reading. I know for this, I just made an independent reading one, and then I came up with a theme question at the very end, because the standards in 8th and 9th start to look at multiple themes. So I just, after they've done all this work, maybe they can come up with some multiple things to kind of put in, and then come up with a picture for evaluation kind of stuff. But I thought it was versatile. It'd be a great way to get independent reading in quickly. And I extended it over 2 months just because we're teaching novels in class as well. We wouldn't just managing for teacher and students the amount of work. So, and then Shannon, you want to talk about the elementary part?
Sure. Because our chapter was Socratic seminar, I just kind of put, you don't have to, I mean, you can click on them if you want, you don't have to. I just kind of put some rules, maybe a rubric that the kids could use in after we would have a Socratic seminar, because we use them for wit and wisdom, or we're supposed to, and some sentence starters just for the kids to see, and we could share, they could keep a copy of it, we could review it. And then for the Bukachaka, I made a seesaw because that's what we use in elementary. We don't use Google Classroom. So if you have to click Save Activity, but it'll just take you through. And I just did Scape because that's what we do, is the Scape activity. And they would just answer each question, and then we could have a discussion afterwards. That's how I would use it right now. And as far as the group brainstorm, it was just a Jamboard with one question up at the top. So it wasn't anything special, because for me to do the group brainstorm with all of those boxes for the individual groups. One, I'm not that great at Google Classroom to use that. And two, I think it would be me teaching the technology for 2 weeks before I ever got one question answered. So I would just stick with things that my kids already know so I can be more effective.
So our goal is to look at students are going to participate in collaborative group discussions with peers in small and large groups. And so a lot of the stuff with the digital kind of starts individual and then kind of moves into like some group discussion kind of stuff. Students are going to use text evidence to support a claim, and that's really big in the junior high and high school grades is how are they using that text evidence. And you can, the nice thing is with the Socratic, you can hear kids using that very quickly. And so one of the things we notice is that a lot of times it's difficult in writing to be able to do, but if they get good at it in spoken language, the next logical step is being able to do it a lot easier in their writing. Then we had a group brainstorm instructional strategy was 0.4 effect size. We would probably add to that things like the pre-planning of the questions is as key as your strategy on how you're going to get to that goal. I think that's going to be an important thing. And then tools, we had Jamboard, EduProtocols, slides to be used depending on the student's ability and the lesson delivery. Jamboard's flexible. It even works well for junior high and high school. And I haven't used it much, but I know Patty Morgan, as our former instructional coach, was getting us more and more into that. And I liked what we were doing with that. And then for our bold school framework, we kind of focused on elementary and then middle high school. So you'll see some differences, but a lot of it kind of goes across. For the middle school and high school, we focused on 8.1 and 9.1 strand, and there wasn't a lot of difference between the two strands right there for 8th and 9th grade students. But the biggest thing is the text evidence to support a claim. And the big thing in 8th and 9th grade is finding what's the best piece of text evidence to be able to use, because they can put any kind of piece of text evidence in there. But if you look at standardized tests, they'll say which one is the best. When you're writing, do they have a good piece of text evidence that kind of fits? Do they pick the best evidence? So that's an important standard, and looks like a lot of the air test stuff kind of reflects upon that quite a bit. So this hits that pretty hard. The EduProtocol was the brainstorm, and we thought Jamboard, Google Slides, even Pear Deck would work pretty well. And then for instructional planning, I would definitely do like a blended learning. Now I've done it like in one big group, and if you've got two teachers, it works really well where you could do like two different discussions and then flip halfway where the kids are talking. But I've also seen it done as an inner-outer circle, but as I'm learning blended learning, I think blended learning might be our best bet there. And then I can't see the bottom one on that, but I think it's something about how would we measure success? Probably anecdotal records, just taking note of how they're participating, seeing how they do with the questions with text evidence. And then Shannon, you anything with the elementary?
No, I think I'm not really looking for text evidence at the beginning of the year. I think it would be more just getting the kids to talk and participate. So my focus would be SL 2.1. So that's about the only difference.
Great job, guys. I love that you had like sentence starters to help your students, and also kind of like a rubric and SOPs for the students so they knew, how do I act during a seminar? What can I say? What do I not say? So I really like that you guys thought about this piece as well. All right, next group, go ahead and get ready and let us know if you have any questions or comments. Feel free to come off mute or put them in the chat.
Okay, we ready, Stephanie? Okay. I'm Ralph, and my partner's Clay. So we have the strategy of vocabulary programs, and the effect size is 0.62. Okay, so question number one, Clay, you want to take this one?
Sure. The question was, is growing student vocabulary key to upward mobility? And it's one of those, when I was reading it, you find yourself nodding yes because you're agreeing with everything that he was saying. The vocabulary sort of correlated with reading comprehension. So the broader vocabulary gives them more ability to understand what they're reading and retain that knowledge as they're going through it. Like I said, it's just one of those as you're reading, you're like, yeah, of course, this totally makes sense. So it's a definite yes. And this one here is one that I kind of use when I do my vocabulary in art, but there's no comprehension without picturing. So a lot of times I think vocabulary is taught and is way back when I remember going through school, we would get the vocabulary list, right? And you'd have to fill in the definition next to the list, and at the end of the week, there'd be a test for everything, and you try and remember it. But by associating the words with an image, kind of reminding me like a reverse version of the thin slide that we saw earlier, it just sort of enhances that comprehension, gives you sort of something to relate to visually, because people tend to remember things better visually than just abstract concepts like definitions.
Okay, question 3. This was more about, what are the most important elements and what does it really mean to be formal and structured in your vocabulary instruction? And like Clay said, they're comparing it to like kind of the instruction where the kids would have like 10 vocabulary words. They'd have to just look them up on a list with using the dictionary, like no context at all, and just try to memorize those words. And that does not really cause retention, and then the students to be able to use those words later, that kind of thing. So to be formal and structured, the book talked about being aligned to standards and the goals that you want to accomplish, and that it's creating situations for kids to think deeper about the words, use them in multiple ways, multiple contexts, and try to get some stretch in to see if they can apply it in ways maybe that you didn't teach them. So a couple things they have as the biggies for vocabulary. The biggest thing they said was context, that the students have to be talking about the words, working with the words in the context where their meaning is going to come out and be used. And for me as a science teacher, social studies teacher in 5th grade, I immediately go to our life science vocabulary at the beginning of the year, where we talk about consumers and producers and those kinds of things. And if we just gave the kids a list and had them look up the words, it doesn't mean too much. But when you deliver it in context, you give them multiple times to work with the words, they definitely retain them a lot better. And they go deeper with how they interact with each other and that kind of thing. So context is really one of the biggest aspects of vocabulary instruction. And the second really big one was picturing. And we often don't take advantage of how the brain works and the ability to understand words and their meaning through images and symbolism and the pictures that kids can create with them. But if they can create pictures and create like images for the words and the words in action, things like that, then they're going to deepen their understanding and they're going to know really the concepts behind those words. So that will lead into using the internet, which is full of pictures, of course. So that's going to be some of the technology tie-in. And the book did mention also repetition. So having multiple exposures to the words, maybe some introductory activities, but also following it up multiple times where the kids can use the words in different ways, maybe create pictures, create images that represent the meaning of the words. And the more exposures they have, the deeper their understanding goes. And then, of course, meaning and pronunciation are tied into that. But context and picturing are definitely the biggies. Okay, question 4. The most important aspects, and it also asks us to kind of reflect on our own practice. So context and picturing are definitely crucial to getting the 0.62 effect size. I think for the most part, teachers do deliver words in context and give kids multiple times to use them. One thought I had is maybe having your TBT discuss like what are the really key concept words that students really need to start with. and using some of the strategies with those words only, and then kind of focusing on the quality of their activities with the words rather than just quantity of words. Because some of the lists that we have, they get long. Like there's a lot of vocabulary the students need to learn for just one standard. So maybe identifying the most important ones and having them go deeper with some of the strategies there. Okay, one example, one EduProtocol was the Frayer model, which most people are probably familiar with. It's the graphic organizer that you see here. So there's a definition part for sure. The part of speech helps them to get the basics of what the word means. Characteristics and facts are the traits, features, facts about the concept that kids can go deeper with. And then for the imaging part, the picturing part, there's a place where they can bring in examples of images. So you could, old school, have them draw things, which I think is perfectly fine. But if we want to make it digital, you could give them this Frayer model digitally, have them do internet searches, screenshot, and find some images on the internet that would help deepen their understanding. And then there's a non-examples part where they put in antonyms and incorrect uses, things like that. So the one thing that they add to this that I had not seen before is an application box at the bottom. And this is meant to help more with context, where it challenges the students to think a little bit more of where they may see these words in different contexts than what was presented in class. And this kind of gets to the relevance part of the rigor relevance framework, that the more they're able to do that, the more relevant it's becoming. So.
And the second protocol was the fast and furious. I think this one really helps with from that memorization aspect of vocabulary through repetition, because it starts off where you're doing an online course of some sort, and then the first time going through, you can kind of look at what you need to review and go over that stuff again, and then the next day they'll take it again, and the goal is going to be like a 90% across the class, and every day, you know, they're taking and seeing these words, so that they have that repetition and reinforcement every time they take the test. I could see doing this spread out a little bit further than just 1 week, especially if you're doing something like a larger project where they're going to be need to use those terms to the project, maybe just a weekly sort of checkup just to make sure that they're still using those words and they've got them sort of on hand.
Okay, to the goal strategy tool paradigm. Obviously, the goal is for the students to really understand the words and the concepts behind them. And when you think about our academic vocabulary, if you understand the vocabulary, you understand most of the concepts within that unit. And I have a word wall in my classroom that has almost all the core vocabulary for the whole year. And as I look across the word wall, it is basically every standard that we go through summarized with the main vocabulary for science and social studies. So that's the bigger picture goal. Strategy, formally or in a structured way, attacking your vocabulary instruction, just meaning that you have it, make sure it's aligned to your standards, and that you're using context and picturing in some strategic ways with some activities that students can do with multiple exposures. And the Frayer model was the one I showed before, and adding a section for context is getting it more into the relevance part of the framework. And the students can do like a Google search for images to pull in things where they can help illustrate the idea. One extension that I thought was awesome was Guess the Vocabulary Word tool. And students will create a progress slide where each slide kind of builds upon the next one. And it's like a slide deck that reveals the Frayer model like one section at a time. And then as they're doing that and presenting it to other kids, the kids can try and guess the vocabulary word with each section that's being revealed. And so it's kind of a good extension with the Freyer model activity.
And then for the framework, I misunderstood and thought it just needs to do the one that applied to the section we're in. So the example that they gave was the high school mathematics lesson, but reading through the lesson, really you could apply it to just about any subject, because you start off with understanding the terms and summarizing this math. Really easy for anything. And then the two vocabulary programs that they used were the Google Image Search and Google Docs, and we're going to be building a Freyer model. And putting together the Freyer model, work your way through to get the application section there at the end, and then the self-assessment just together with the rigor and relevance.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome. I love the game, like using games with vocab, I think really helps students master. So like guessing that vocabulary word could be a really fun way. And it looks like there is a resource in here if you choose to use that activity. All right. Any questions or comments? Feel free to come off mute or post them in the chat. All right, the next chapter is mine, Angie, Scott, and Colin. So we are going to be talking to you about direct instruction. The effect size for direct instruction is 0.6.
All right, so if you're talking about direct instruction, probably the big people always think about lecture, but there's actually a difference in direct instruction and lecture, because a lecture, teacher is sharing the knowledge with the students, the teacher identifies the intentions, and the teacher models. Notice the teacher does everything. But for direct instruction, lecture can be a part of direct instruction. The teacher still identifies their academic intentions, and the teacher shares those expectations and knows that the students understand. So at some point in time, students have to let you know what they've gotten, so they're participating. So a teacher has a plan for the lecture and includes modeling and checking for understanding. Students do a guided practice, and teacher coaches and provides remediation. Teachers cue the students to the most salient points and engages in independent practice to the students are engaging in independent practice. So notice that your students have the guided practice and independent practice. So those are like the two biggies, the differences between lecture and direct instruction.
So for question 2, it says, the question was, what tools can we leverage to determine whether it's time to move on or reteach when employing direct instruction as a classroom strategy? So the ones that I came up with here is if the direct instruction involves a slideshow presentation using Google Slides or something like that, you can easily add slides into your Google slide presentation using Pear Deck to make the direct instruction presentation interactive, to where you're collecting information from the students as you progress through your lesson. So you have little checkpoints throughout your presentation where you can grab that knowledge and then either reinforce things that maybe aren't being understood as well, but you can make changes to your direct instruction on the fly, getting that formative feedback as you're going through this. Another strategy that you can employ is the exit ticket strategy. Again, there's multiple ways that you can do this. You can use this using Google Classroom. just using the questioning feature that's built into Google Classroom to get just a quick, check of the students before they walk out the door. If it's something that's a little bit more and you want to dig into the data a little bit, maybe Google Forms is a better solution as well. Or you could just create a Google slide show and have the students, put their information. Again, you could use Pear Deck with Google Slides to just grab that formative information as you're finishing up with your direct instruction lesson.
And then we're going to talk about the two major benefits that kind of go with integrating technology into direct instruction. So it's always good to have a back channel. This allows your students to ask questions and that come up while you're teaching them or using that direct instruction. And then you can go back and answer those questions, or maybe a student can answer it in the chat. I think a lot of us had practice with this when we were virtual in the spring 2 years ago. And so that was just kind of a great way to kind of show that. So you could use maybe a Google slide or a Google Doc or Pear Deck or Wakelet or something like that to have that back channel. And then you're able to go in and see what kind of questions came up as you were using direct instruction. Another tool that was really helpful is using Kahoot. And a lot of you use Kahoot or Gimkit or some other game-based learning. And your students are able to play the game. And as they're playing, you kind of pause and you go over the question. So you go over the different questions, you go into more detail about the answers to the questions, and then your students can continue to interact with a game type of learning.
All right, question 4. I'm Colin, by the way. Sorry, I didn't get to work with any of you guys last time. I had COVID, so that was super fun. My body decided to hold out until the last week of the school year, so that was great timing. Question 4 says, how would you respond to the naysayers who believe direct instruction is an antiquated strategy, and what coaching might you provide to this person? And what I have startup here, I feel like is kind of the main idea or theme of the book. What's effective is greater or much more important than what's new and shiny. And I think I can, in a lot of ways, be kind of a poster child for that, if you will, since I just finished my 2nd year of teaching. And even my training at Ohio State, I feel like the focus was really heavy on technology, and I kind of came into my first year like guns a-blazing, wanting to throw out like every ed puzzle and Flipgrid and Pear Deck that I could. So that first year I kind of learned what this book is teaching us, that really you have to start with the academic goals and then use technology in a way that's elevating that for the needs and learning of our students. So that would be my main response to that person. And then what coaching could they provide? I would say they could benefit from tools like the things I mentioned, Pear Deck, Kahoot, any of the Google apps. And kind of what Angie did with differentiating between direct instruction and lecturing, I would give this person that same spiel and say, look, technology doesn't need to scare you. It's not here to replace direct instruction. It's meant to enhance it to better meet the needs of your students. So it can lead to heightened student engagement, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then it can also lead, this is really important for our quieter students, to discrete student-teacher communication. I think I just heard something in the chat, or maybe not, which if you click on that link, Steph, for example, Classroom Q is a great resource. This is just the homepage, but I learned about this from Krista Mesner, who I believe learned about it from Steph. It always goes back to Steph. But this was a great tool I used mostly during student work time, but it's super easy to set up. Oh, great. Are you going to sign in for me and everything? Awesome. But this is a great tool to use. Students enter the code and then they can just join if they need your help. So it's kind of like a virtual, discrete way of raising their hands and asking a question in the classroom. But I also did use this with direct instruction a few times, where I would kind of open the floor for questions, because they can also add a comment or a note next to their name to let you know either what they're struggling with or what they need help with. So it's a very simple, like minimalistic, super accessible resource to use. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an example. So yeah, Steph's doing that right now. She just clicked that big assistance needed button, and then she shows up in your queue. And only you can see this. The students can't see it, so they don't know who else has clicked that need assistance button. And it's just a really great way to kind of streamline where you go and when during the classroom. They can also see like how many students are ahead of them and so on, so they can kind of self-regulate that way and know to be working on something and that you'll get to them in 2 or 3 students' time. So I just wanted to share that resource. I really loved using that this past year. So if you go back to the slides, thanks, Stephanie. And then, yeah, using things like that or other technology tools to assess whether to move forward or to kind of stick with what you're currently teaching in your direct instruction to hit ideas and kind of hammer home certain things before moving forward.
And then our 2 Edu protocols was thin slides was the first one. And so thin slides, we did this kind of the other time, but you have a template right here if you want the template. And what students do is they have one slide, and on that slide, they add one image and one word. And so by the time that students are done, this is an example. So the teacher was teaching about the American Revolution, and then the students all went in at the end of the lesson and they all added their one image and their one word. And what you do is you just hit the present and you just go through the slides, and kids quickly talk about their one word and one image. It takes about 4 seconds, and you can see these kids did a lot of transitions. But it's just a great way to see, okay, what did they take away from it? And every student usually has a different word and different image and a different reason for why they added that to the slide deck. And I always like to hit the present word, because if a student is not done after, this should take 3 minutes to create. So again, this should take 3 minutes to make that one word, one image, one slide. And if it's taking them longer, their edits will not be shown to the class when you hit present. And so this student right here, they might say, that wasn't my image. Well, you're like, well, that was your image during the 3-minute time period. Next time, work faster. But then you kind of see what they have. Our next one was the ultimate exit ticket. And this one is a quick exit ticket at the end of the class period. You could also do this as an entrance ticket. And every day the students would add a little bit more to their learning. So what did they learn on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday? And so they can see it all on one place. You could also do this with 5 different slides. It doesn't have to look like this. And you could just have the students quickly write Monday, and then they could write what they learned on Monday, and then they could duplicate it and write what they did on Tuesday, or you could force a copy in Google Classroom or have them do it on paper. So either way, it just kind of gives them a few minutes to recapture what they learned from the lesson.
So on this page, we had our goal, and this was taken from the example that we used in the book. But the goal was to analyze cartoons, artifacts, artwork, charts, and graphs related to eras and themes, and then use and interpret a primary source document. Okay, so the strategy that we were using for this one would be a direct instruction strategy with a 0.6 effect size. And then the tools that they suggested using were using Kahoot. This allows you to pose questions to the students in a fun, gamified, kind of engaging way. And you can quickly grab some formative data from the student responses to help inform the direction you're going to go with your instruction. Okay, and I can go ahead and talk about the high school standard. I did that one. So for step one, so we are first of all identifying the academic outcomes. So I chose a music example for this. So students will sing or play alone, advance music literature, and demonstrate accurate intonation and rhythm fundamentals, and then advanced technique and a high degree of musicality. Okay, so with this, we're going to use direct instruction. So this would be the band director standing in front of the group, or maybe in a small group setting as well, depending on how you wanted to do that. But in this one, I chose to use the tool Flipgrid. So students could record their performance of the literature being worked on in class. This would allow me as the teacher to see if the things that we worked on in the large group rehearsal went well, and then I get a recording of where they're at with the music. That allows me to then go back on my own time and listen through those different performances and decide if my goal is being met. Are they hitting the points that we're covering in class? And I can kind of do a quick assessment of that and then design what my next rehearsal might look like. And then in the plan blended instruction, the students will work on literature as a whole, as a group. Students will record themselves individually at home. So this is kind of like a little bit of a flipped classroom model here as well. Instruction will be adjusted based on the recorded performances on the literature. And then rigor performance being assessed is aimed at advanced technique and high degree of musicality. Students will be assessed on the overall phrasing, musicality, as well as correct notes and rhythms.
I can talk about the middle school standard. So this was actually a lesson I did in the spring during our argumentation unit. So students had to define and identify examples of logos, ethos, and pathos in advertisements. And obviously the aligned instructional strategy is direct instruction. You can click on that Pear Deck if you want, Stephanie. This kind of goes from, I forgot that was in there. That was shared by Stephanie at some point in the school year. But this kind of started out as a lecture with just kind of establishing that foundation of defining logos, ethos, and pathos. But I found this to be probably the most effective Pear Deck I did all year, because during that sharing of these three terms and the information, the students were really struggling. But once we got to these video examples with interactive slides where they had to define the terms and identify which one was in that video, I really saw it start to click with them. And then they were asked to go a step further and analyze. So I feel like this was a great example of technology that really drove home an idea and helped them understand it. So I just wanted to share that. And then as I was self-assessing in the Bold School framework, something the relevance wasn't quite there. These were pretty old ads. You saw the Sarah McLachlan ad. You might have seen that for a sec. That's from like 1995 probably. I thought for future reference, when I do this, I could maybe find like 3 Super Bowl ads from that Super Bowl, since we do this in the spring after the Super Bowl takes place. So that could be something to make it more relevant for them. But yeah, that was the middle school breakdown for the Bold School framework.
All right, so the elementary one, students were going to analyze an artifact, a primary source artifact. So they started off looking at an example of a political cartoon, and the teacher walked them through that and used a Kahoot to walk the students through. And then the students were given their own political cartoon for independent practice, and the teacher was able to walk around, answer questions, and help students if they were struggling. And then students on their own got a third political cartoon that they were going to analyze and go through. And then the teacher, when they were looking at it, they were looking at the quads, you know, were the students stuck in that quad A, or were they able to move down into that quad D, where we're hoping they can have, you know, the high rigor and the high relevance when they're looking at self-evaluating. If you want a lot more details on this particular lesson, it is the one directly from the book. So you'll see I've got like the page numbers in there. It's page 102 and 103.
All right, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we will be back to learn a bit about peer tutoring. Welcome back from the quick break. We are going to go ahead and give away a free EduProtocol book. So I'm going to go ahead and spin the wheel, and we will see who is up for one. All right, Jen Miller. So we will email you after this session, maybe today or tomorrow, to ask you which one you would like. So just expect that email. And those of you that won last time, your book should be in your mailbox. I inter-office them as well. So those should all be there too. All right, now we have chapter 7. So Kristen and Whitney.
Hi guys, we have chapter 7. I'm Kristen and I do 6th grade science and social studies. Go ahead, Whitney.
Hi, I'm Whitney. I'm the assistant principal at Harmon.
Woohoo! I would hate to introduce you. We should have introduced each other.
We should have.
There we go. All right, our strategy was peer tutoring. And of course, as always, I went a different direction to begin with. And so chapter 7 is peer tutoring. And go ahead, Stephanie. You can just kind of click and I'll play. Teachers, are you ever feeling uninspired? Students feeling unmotivated? Well, with a dose of creativity and a layer of technology, you can transform your student achievement. With the peer tutoring, your students are going to gain confidence. These are kind of like our goals: to gain confidence, provide feedback, have fun, and yes, they will learn as well, but don't tell them that.
All right, so the effect size of this strategy is a 0.55, which actually puts it in the moderate range. So it has the potential to accelerate student achievement, but I would also like to note that a 0.6 is like the next range. So it's pretty darn awesome and almost up to the next level, just so you know. For the first question, I feel like we kind of hit the jackpot on these questions because they were actually pretty easy. So which quadrant does the peer tutoring strategy fall in on rigor and relevance? So backing up a little bit, it specifically references Barbara's peer tutoring. So if you didn't read the chapter, which you weren't supposed to because that's what we did, Barbara is a foreign language teacher who used Skype, Hangouts, FaceTime, whatever, to hook her kids up with different language speakers. I think they were like in Mexico City or something. I could be misquoting, but it's a Spanish class. So she hooks them up with native Spanish speakers. And those kids and her kids are kind of the same level in their new language acquisition. So just a simple video conferencing tool took it up to quadrant D. And what that means is that like the kids were having conversations with each other, and they had certain parameters like vocabulary or, conjugated verbs, right? Because we all remember that. And just they had to work them into their conversation. But who knows where the conversation is going to go with junior high or high school students. So yes, there are certain rote things that they have to have memorized, have to have practiced, but in the realm of a conversation, it's very much unpredictable real world setting. They are applying their knowledge into that environment, which is very authentic. So that takes it to a level D on rigor and relevance. Side note, it would also be a SAMR level D because just through a simple tool like video conferencing, this idea of peer tutoring transcends into something that without the technology would not be even remotely possible. Next slide. Question 2. Now, question 2 goes with the next slide as well. So we'll get to some more specifics. But the idea here is we partner students with peer tutors and technology. What are some of the most important things to consider to ensure success? There's a laundry list. And there's actually a numbered list in the chapter along with some other little anecdotes throughout. But what Kristen and I really talked about was the idea of safety and trust in the learning and participation of peer tutoring. So those of us who did this pre-blended or have dabbled in it since, really, I think a lot of us used it as, we're going to put the kid that really knows it with the kid who really doesn't, because it's tutoring, right? And then me as the teacher, I don't have to do that remediation because the smart kid did it. None of us actually had those thoughts or said them out loud, but really that's the direction it tended to go. And what happens when you do that, and why it may not have been successful for you like it wasn't successful for me, is that immediately the kid who identifies as the dumb kid in that situation, like, they're shut down. Their brain is not even open to learning new information because they know that's how you identified them as the teacher. They know the classmate they're paired with has identified them that way. And there's already this stigma in place, which stops learning. So one of the main things that focused on was making sure that you group or pair up the peer tutors where they're on a level with each other, whether that's acquisition of a skill, whether that's similar backgrounds personally, whether it's a shared interest. Give them something that makes them connect as equals. And that's the only real way that the strategy is going to be successful. And they have to feel safe, because if they don't feel safe making mistakes, if they don't feel safe learning from their partner, then really the effect size is nothing, because it's not going to work. The other two bullet points that we really focused on, just go back for a sec, Steph, were that you have to have training and mentoring or monitoring. So just like in a blended learning station rotation, what did we say? We said you spend the first 2 weeks on a timer, training them to move, training them to complete a task appropriately and what to do next. You have to train them in peer tutoring before you throw them into it. You have to model it with them in the classroom before you throw them into it. And then continuing to monitor that process when the kids are in it. And then the third bullet point, and what makes this a bold strategy, is because of the technology component, you are no longer bound by the constraints of your classroom, your school, your district, or even the boundaries of the country. So that's really like what takes it from a regular good strategy. And I remember Colin talking about, like, don't throw the good stuff out, right? So it's still a good strategy, even if it doesn't include technology. But it can really transcend with just a few simple tools. Okay, next slide now. These are the numbered things that the book wanted us to talk about. Everything I just said applies, but this breaks it out as to the very important things to think about when you're setting kids up for peer tutoring. So we talked about matched intentionally. It's for practice, not learning new material. You're not taking work off of your plate by throwing it on another kid who can just do it and teach the other kids. We talked about training. We talked about how, we didn't talk about this, but with the idea of trust and safety, the kids are in control. The teacher in the book scenario did not sit there like, okay, sentence number 2, say it to your partner. The teacher monitored to make sure conversations were appropriate, which is the next thing, number 5, but did not control that setting. There were parameters. It was basically like a design challenge, really, like there's constraints, but then the teacher facilitates and does not control. And then we also talked about it not having to be inside the classroom. Next slide. Question 3 says, peer tutoring is not a time for the teacher to sit behind a desk. What are the roles of a teacher when employing this high effect size strategy? It really says it in the question, don't sit behind the desk. I think one of the things we do if we see something going well, or if kids look engaged, we tend to back away a little bit. And that's not how many of you have partnered up friends because it's safe, right? They'll work for each other. And then halfway through, they're talking about their football game last weekend. So the idea is circulate, assess, repeat. Use it as an opportunity for formative assessment. Make sure the kids are on task and on topic. Keep moving them around because it's individualized time. So Thank you. Thank you for that. Really, that's what it breaks down to. Circulate, assess, and repeat. And you're assessing in many ways. Next slide. And question 4, just asked to give some examples of, thinking about class, school, or district. What are some ways that you could leverage peer tutors outside the walls of your own buildings? And how do we make sure those partnerships are mutually beneficial? Because again, it goes back to the kids feeling safe and able to trust that environment and that strategy, and each person being able to gain something from it. One of the cool things that it talked about with the Spanish class that used this peer tutoring model is not only were they doing better in their new language and they were showing gains there, like their ELA work was getting better. So there were a lot of side benefits just through that reflective practice and just through getting that feedback from their peer tutor. So just thinking like at Harmon and Tollgate, simple, easy way to do it is to use something like we're using right now and work across buildings. We can pair 2 6th grade classes up and have them have partners across the district instead of just in class where they could be in a fight with their partner from recess. So that can create new relationships. It can help them socialize and also, create a safe environment because it's not bound by some of the drama that happens in middle school. And then we can also pair across grade bands. So I mentioned, earlier about not having the kid who knows it teach the kid who doesn't. But there are ways to create a peer tutoring environment that's beneficial when you are having older kids read to younger kids, or be pen pals with a different grade band, or a different type of classroom. So there are ways to do that where there is a bit of an experience or skill gap. It just has to be really intentional. Again, mutually beneficial. Outside of the district, I'm locked into social studies for some reason in my brain with this, but we learn about different regions and we learn about different climate zones depending on where you are grade level wise and what your core curriculum is. But you can pair up according to region or according to science or social studies topic. Seek out people or places, classrooms that, I'm sorry, my daughter just walked in all dressed up, that can kind of complement that particular work. Hold on, baby. Hold on. Are you going to wave? Okay. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. Say hi and then say bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye. Woo, be careful. Okay. All right. And I've totally lost my place. And then I just made a note that it's really easy to do this in an ELA or a math class, because literally ELA and math really go across any boundary line. And so you could pair up any way that you wanted to, anywhere that you wanted to. All right, next slide.
All right, I'll take over from here, Whitney, while you take care of your little princess. So we had 2 ed protocols. One was a tech coach and one is the nacho paragraph. Let's start with the nacho paragraph, please. Okay, we just used the template that they gave. I think we kind of all probably do something somehow similar to this, where you can give a paragraph to the kids and then they have to edit it. And the edits you would list underneath of there, and have the kids, you can have them highlight their, like their 4 adjectives could be in one color there, so it's easier grading for you. I'm the science social studies. So Ralph, the whole time I sit here and I think, ooh, I'm going to ask Ralph to do this. I'm going to ask Ralph to do that. So get ready, Ralph. So the nacho template we have in there, that we focused on the rock cycle. And by we, I mean me. I focused on the rock cycle. We had just did the Starburst lab where you have kids. Yes, thank you. I even put the video in there. I forgot. Where the kids create the rock cycle using Starburst. And so I included this there, but then you could have them, go ahead to the tech coach as well, because we combined both of these. So what we thought would be cool is that if Whitney and I were partners, Then Whitney with the tech coach, she would be student B would be the coach, and she would be standing over my shoulder, or even online right now as we are, and be explaining how to do these things. So it's kind of like Whitney equated it to like where you had to do like how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you had to list all the instructions, and no one ever said open the peanut butter, no one ever said get out the bread, and so then your teacher did it and made you feel really dumb. But that's what the tech coach is kind of. It's like, okay, take your sediment, and then they have to use the vocabulary, kind of what the other guys were talking about, to create this activity. So it's like they're hands off completely. So you can use the tech coach anyway, with technology or without technology. But it would be basically them saying, okay, take your things, do this, next step is this. And the whole time I have to do what they say. And then to flip that, if you could, would you go to, I think it's the one 13 maybe, where I didn't link it on here, the recipe jumble. I didn't link it. There it is. I don't know why I called it this. It's right there. Yep. It's a digital recipe jumble. And the reason I called it a recipe jumble is one day during COVID last year, I typed up all of the directions to make Jell-O for my kids, because I needed them to just work together and get along. And then I cut them apart, and they had to put them in order and then do it. Well, this could be another tech coach thing where you would flip now. Whitney told me how to do the starburst. Now I'm going to tell her, okay, step 1 of the rock cycle would be you would move things over, which I feel is kind of nice, because it's like, no, just let me do it. And it's like, no, you can't. You have to explain it to me. That's the hardest part. So that was a really cool thing that Stephanie shared with me. Stephanie, I don't know where I was at. Go back. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of how the tech coach and the nacho paragraph worked. We kind of combined them because I guess we're overachievers, but you can go to the next one. For us, for our goal, basically, when I do my peer tutoring, I don't call it peer tutoring. I call it a trusted friend. In my class, I'm like, go find a trusted friend. It doesn't have to be the same person, but just somebody that you can receive feedback from. And so we know that kids need to learn to receive that constructive feedback and have that confidence build, that boost, and that safe environment to share. For our strategy, we just said that, the peer tutoring through the video conferencing and asynchronous video, like you can do that in person and you can do it online, which is nice. Some types of peer tutoring might be your turn and talks. I do that all the time. I'm like, well, what do you think about this? Turn and talk, to where they have to develop an answer. They can't just sit there and wait for somebody else to answer. So they have to turn and talk. So they can either create their own question or their own answer, or build one. Obviously, Moat and Google Comments, to where they could record themselves, that verbal feedback. The Stick It Together, I don't think I linked that on there, Stephanie, but we can do that later, which is really cool. I think we've all done that before. Oh, she's good. She knows where it's at. But a Stick It Together is, I used it in math, where each kid had to solve the problem on a Post-it, and then you come together and you share how you solved it. And then once you share it, each color represents a different kid. Once you share your answer, then you come up with a best answer that uses all of those things, which is really cool. And you can use it in anything. So I'm glad that we have that digitally, because I only had it for math, this is really nice. Alrighty. And then you can go to the next thing. I only came up with one, and it was the middle school standard. So the elementary standard is from the book, which you guys can all go and see. I don't necessarily need to go through the middle school standard, but it's basically just, we were explaining the rock cycle. The peer tutoring was that nacho paragraph, as well as the tech coach. I did do the digital recipe jumble there, just so you can use that as however you see fit. And I don't know, is that it, Stephanie? Is that the last one? There you go. Ta-da. I don't know what all those emojis were. I know I love, or those things, I love them.
Nice job. All right. I exited out of the wrong tab, so give me a second to get out the other. But if there's any comments or questions, feel free to throw those into the chat. Man, you guys are quiet today.
I do want to shout out to Ralph. Ralph, if you want to get together and do something like that, I would be on board.
All right, chapter 8.
Okay, this brings us to chapter 8. Just a quick introduction. I have Aaron. Aaron, you on here?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
There we go. And then I'm Hugh Frost, and I'll be like my avatar, leaning over, saying hi. Our chapter 8 focused on concept mapping. And you could go to the next slide down there. And then concept mapping just dealt with the instructional strategy that lets students basically graphically represent their own thinking. It also requires that they think deeply about information and apply creativity to visualizing and mapping their own understanding. So that's kind of part of the concept that we'll discuss and talk about in chapter 8. Okay, next slide. All right, effect size is 0.64. Okay, question 1. Question 1 states, role play what a conversation might sound like with a teacher who believes graphic organizers are a strategy. How do we move these folks to better understanding of the goal, strategy, and tool paradigm? In chapter 8, our author kind of talks about and discusses, gives an example of a teacher named Greg. He coined the term that Greg was a graphic organizer king. So basically, through all the days of the year, he had graphic organizers to support his instruction within the classroom. Now, our author also says, I'm not necessarily against that, but we need to incorporate more of a concept maps for those graphic organizing abilities. So there's a brief statement between an admin and a teacher here, just kind of highlighting or summarizing how a conversation might be. So the admin essentially talks about, do you think that you've achieved the goals of your lesson? Therefore, then the teacher is kind of concerned, like, hey, I just wish I could engage my students a little bit more. We're working on the concept of paragraph writing, and we're getting an assessment next week. And then the admin just states that, hey, I noticed that your main activity was using the paragraph using a hamburger graphic organizer. So then the teacher is just stating, yes, I love graphic organizers. That's how I teach every year. And I feel that this is an excellent strategy to use in the classes. And then at the end, the admin just asks, hey, can I offer a few thoughts? So kind of what you're going to see right now when we press on the link is just like an informal, conversation that we have as far as for the admin and teacher discussion that's taking place. Got to get access.
Yeah, can you send it to me real quick?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so my technology is very slow. So what we'll do is we could come back to that section and kind of keep going there. But so also we had question 2. So question 2 decided, say, how can we advocate for student choice in the implementation of concept mapping in the classroom? The basic thing about the book was they wanted to say, we don't want to spoon feed our kids. When we just give them graphic organizers or when we just teach, there's only one way. We want to go away from that. We don't want to spoon feed them. We want to develop and provide more choices for our students. And that way, those more choices lead to concept maps to where they develop their own thought process in order to graphically represent that thinking. So, answer, provide tools that are matched to a strategy and assessed through a framework to confirm that students are moving toward an academic goal. Also, we could allow students to think in a way that makes sense to them. So essentially meeting them at their level. What makes sense to that particular student in order for them to learn and develop the skills they need. Also, utilize tech like Prezi or Poplet. Then students have all kinds of ways to convey how they're connecting to that particular schema. So just utilizing technology in order to connect those frameworks and that thought process for their instruction.
Okay, next slide is question 3. Question 3 asked us to summarize the cognitive science behind the effectiveness of the concept mapping strategy. So the whole big thing behind concept mapping is that it puts students in control of their own learning. Instead of handing them a pre-made graphic organizer, students create their own graphic organizer that's going to help them organize their thinking in a way that would make sense to them. So in order to connect and make those graphic organizers in a way that makes sense to them, the students have to be thinking deeply about the information, and they're using creativity to display their understanding visually. And next slide is question 4. There we go. The 3 steps. What 3 steps should teachers model in order to ensure concept mapping success? So the first step, so concept mapping, basically you have to model it in order for the students to be able to do it. So this takes a little bit of time in the modeling phase. Step 1 is starting with a main idea, a topic, or an issue. Step 2, determining key concepts. And step 3 is connecting those concepts by creating linking phrases and words. So this strategy is something that can be used across all genres. The example that we're going to have up in the next slides is like a science lesson, but it can literally be used in anything, any sort of main idea, topic, or issue, and the students can create their own concept map or their own graphic organizer that helps display their thinking. Stephanie, if you click on the think about it, maybe. No, maybe I screwed it up. I think I linked it on there, but it's on there somewhere. Maybe go try clicking on towards the bottom of it. There it is. Okay. So I just linked this think about it on there for chapter 8. It lists those 3 steps on the left side, and then some more ways to think about concept mapping as a strategy, because a lot of people think graphic organizers, yeah, that's my strategy, but graphic organizers really aren't a strategy, they're a tool. Concept maps are a strategy because they improve cognition and help students learn by putting them in control and making their own graphic organizers. Leveraging technologies gives students that much more freedom to map their understanding, so in a way that makes sense to them. And we know that concept mapping is this 3-step process that teachers have to model so that students can eventually complete all 3 of those steps on their own to create their own concept maps. Okay, now you can go back. There we go, our Edu protocols. Okay, so our first Edu protocol was 8 parts grammar. So 8 parts grammar. That was like the recipe card for 8 parts grammar. But what it does is it allows students to learn and practice using all 8 parts of speech at the same time in authentic ways. And as a former ELA teacher, when grammar was a big part of the curriculum, I thought this was really interesting because I always felt like teaching all 8 parts of speech took so long, and it took so much time away from other things that I could have been doing. So I really liked this Edu protocol because you can learn and practice them all at the same time. And you can use it with the concept mapping strategy as well. Students will get inspiration for writing from a presented visual. So you can make this fun. You could show a picture, you could show a meme, you could show a GIF, and that's like their inspiration of what they're going to write a paragraph about. Then they create a concept map to organize their ideas for writing. And then after they create their concept map, they'll write a well-written paragraph using all 8 parts of speech. So rather than just using, that passing out the hamburger graphic organizer, they're able to create their own concept map before they write their paragraph. Yeah, and the recipes for both of our Edu protocols are linked there on the left, the recipe cards.
And so the other one we talked about was the cyber sandwich. So what is it? The cyber sandwich involves the use of student collaboration and communication in order to utilize their critical thinking skills. So through all this, we want to tap into getting students to think a little bit more deeply on their particular subject. So how will that look? Students will read and collect data, students will compare and contrast, and students will summarize content and share it in groups, therefore putting it into that sandwich that takes place. Okay, and that's good visual representation right there showing the cyber sandwich. All right, now how will this look in a classroom as far as for instruction? So say students will be assigned partners for a pair and share. Student A and student B will take, it's recommended 10 minutes to read the selected content. So then partners will then come together, take 5 minutes to discuss their findings and complete the Venn diagram, comparing and contrasting. Students will then summarize their findings in an individual paragraph format, and each student will then present their material to the class using and following that particular framework for that education.
And then the example for 8 parts grammar, it could serve as a great warm-up or like a bell ringer activity in ELA classes throughout, you know, the grade levels. It was recommended in the book, or not in the book, this is the Edu-Protocol, but it was recommended to be done 3 to 4 times a week for 20 to 25 repetitions or until the entire class shows mastery. So this is something that's going to take a while to build mastery, but it can be a fairly quick activity that you could do at the beginning of class. So again, students will be presented with a fun pic, meme, or GIF as inspiration for writing a paragraph. Students will each create their own concept map to organize ideas for their paragraph. And then using that concept map, they'll compose a paragraph that contains all 8 parts of speech using the visual as their subject. So in that example, this was like an example of what kind of like the concept map and the paragraph together could look like. They created a concept map by, I know it's kind of small, but each section on like the left and the right sides are a part of speech. And then the paragraph is in the middle, and they color coded the parts of speech and then highlighted them in that color in their paragraph so that they could make sure they had all 8 parts of speech in their paragraph. And the picture on the right was like their inspiration. So it was what they were supposed to be writing the paragraph about, something having to do with that picture. So obviously you could get a lot of different things there from that. And then for our goal, strategy, tool, paradigm, we took this from the end of chapter 8 in the book, page 125. Students will use tools to discern between structure and function. This is an elementary science lesson. Students will develop a model or a concept map to showcase the different structures of various plants and animals along with their functions. The strategy is to use blended instruction using, like you would start with a teacher-led mini lesson, and then peer collaboration, and then modeling of like how to create a concept map, and then the students would create their own concept maps. Tools that you could use Prezi for this would be a good one, Google Slides, and you could incorporate the cyber sandwich or the 8 parts grammar if you wanted to. And then again, we took this from the end of chapter 8. It was an elementary science lesson from page 125. So the desired academic outcomes are that the students will use tools to discern between structure and function, and students will develop a model to showcase the different structures of various plants and animals along with their function. The strategy is our concept mapping with a 0.64 effect size. Digital tools that could be used are Prezi and Google Slides. For blended instruction, we'd start with a mini lesson on form and function, and then students would select a plant or an animal, and design a concept map using Google Slides or Prezi. And then the concept map will include images of the organism's parts and a description of their function. And then the rigor was like in quadrant B, creating a concept map from scratch. And then the relevance, the teacher in the mini lesson can point out the ways that evaluative and comparative thinking can show up in other subject areas as well as in the real world. And then Were we able to get that video up? Oh, great. Okay.
And to close was our informal conversation in regards to question number 1 about the lesson in graphic organizer. Ms. Moskowitz, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you, Mr. Frost?
Okay, I'm doing excellent. I just wanted to take the time now to discuss our reflections that we had on our last lesson.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. One thing I'm really glad that you had an opportunity to reflect on your teaching. And after our conversation, it seemed like you really quickly understood that graphic organizers are a tool and not just a strategy.
Yes.
I really enjoyed how you stated that some graphic organizers that you had in your collection that you used had no guarantee that it would actually work to help student learning.
Yeah.
So you realize that could possibly just waste students' time.
Right.
And that use of graphic organizers to make sure that they will help your students develop the skills you want them to develop by providing them more options.
Right.
And by not differentiating your graphic organizers, it becomes just about your choice versus students' thinking and understanding.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, during our last PD, I remember how we discussed that concept maps can improve student cognition and can help put the students more in control of their learning. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. We know that our brains achieve learning by connecting a new idea with an old idea. So if I can incorporate more concept maps into my teaching, then students would be more likely to comprehend the new information.
Wow. See, that's great, because now I can think about a study that was done by researchers at Boise State University. What they did was they divided a group of 7th grade students and then asked them to read passages of the text. So they had group A, which developed their own concept map. Group B was given a concept map to actually fill out. And group C was just asked to read the passage twice. They were all then tested on the passage, and the students were asked to predict how many questions they got right. Any idea on that particular outcome?
Well, based on the information we got during our PD, I would guess that the students who developed a concept map were most likely more accurate in their predictions. Because we know that the concept map can also be considered a formative assessment. It can show both teachers and the students where a student might be struggling or where they might be making connections in their learning.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And those students who developed their own concept map, it was shown that they had a distinct advantage over those who didn't. They were able to see exactly where their understanding was clear and where it was confused.
Yeah, that makes really good sense. And, you know, this has been a very helpful experience because instead of teachers just handing out a pre-made graphic organizer, I now know that concept mapping can provide an opportunity for students to have more choices and for them to be able to organize their thinking in their own way that would make sense to them.
Oh, well, that's great. That's great. And as always, it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. Have a great day.
You too.
I love that little role play at the end with your video, so nice job. All right, next up we have chapter 9, so worked examples.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So we had chapter 9 of the Bold School, and we're going to go ahead and get started with that. So what does Wendy Peppercorn and Squints from the movie Sandlot and texting during class have to do with instruction and what can get in the way? Today, we're going to talk about that in chapter 9 strategy. And we're going to tell you how you can make your instruction a little bit more Bold School. But first, let's introduce ourselves. So go ahead, Jen.
I'm Jen Miller. Sorry if you hear any background noise. I have an almost 2-year-old who's just keeping himself busy right here. But I've taught at Diley for 9 years, mostly math. So.
And I'm Matt Dansby. I'm the principal at Tucson Elementary, and I have 2 daughters, and I'm expecting a third here in September. So, girl dad. So our strategy that we were introducing is worked examples, and we're going to talk about, like I said, a little bit of why the author started off with the old Sandlot reference, and about Hattie's work here as we go through. But these are some quick examples of what you can get caught up doing in a classroom is sitting and watching the teacher do that work example, and by the time they get done with their first problem, it's of course time to start practicing. And unfortunately, what can happen is the effect size can go down. So if we can jump to the next slide.
So the effect size in 2008 was actually 0.57. And then when they redid it in 2015, it was 0.37. And they contribute a lot of the decrease in that with our decreased attention spans because of all the technology that is thrown in front of kids at all times. So that's where they're seeing a decrease.
And so that's where the Sandlot reference came in. The kids were there to swim, but good old Wendy was in the lifeguard chair, and it kept at least definitely Squints from being able to concentrate on being able to swim. And so again, when we talk about the decreased attention spans and looking at what kids are doing in the classroom, you can of course know that if they have a device, that sometimes their attention span is left not on the teacher showing out that work example. So here's just a little quick cartoon of a worked example. And the quote there is, when you put it like that, Bob, that completely clears up everything. It makes sense. So this is of course an extreme example, but the point here is that when you put the example up there and then you can talk through it with kiddos, they have a better opportunity than if they're trying to track as you complete it that 1 or 2 times. So it's important to really help key in on some concepts here.
And then some of the questions, he's offering some explanations as why worked examples have seen a decrease in their effect size. And a lot of it is the multiple social media accounts, the video games, the decreased attention spans, which we've touched on. And then from a young age, kids have always had some type of technology device in them, and it's always something on the screen. So when something new doesn't pop up right away, or they actually have to attain focus for longer than like a minute, they don't retain anything. And then the other question was, do worked examples still have a place in the modern classroom? They're still needed in the modern classroom, but more as like a blended instructional strategy. They need to be able to go back to the worked example multiple times in order to process the new information. So like, for example, I know our math department has created notes, like digital notes. So when the kids were hybrid this year, they are able to reference back to those examples repeatedly, time after time again. So it was something that they're able to keep referring back to, which is what kids need. And then you can go to the next slide. The second question was how you might explain the cognitive load theory to a person who hasn't read Bold School. So there's 3 components. The first one is intrinsic. The teacher cannot change this. Whatever the task requires the student to do is what it is requiring. There's no adaptations to it. Thank you. The extraneous one is what is needed to work through a problem, and the teacher can influence this partially. And then the last one, germane, it's connecting schema or creating new ones. And the teachers do have the ability to affect this one, and it helps offset some of the stress on the working memory by connecting it to previous things. So when you're able to take new material and connect it to their older material, they're able to process it a little bit different and help retain that information a little bit. And then the next slide.
So the third question was, which 2 elements should be present in order to ensure the worked examples are effective? And so they require 2 things. One, it requires that the teacher does an outline, a step-by-step process to solve the problem, while specifically explaining the thought process behind it. So it's the metacognition of really thinking or talking about your thinking to students and making sure that they understand that step-by-step process. And then the teacher also needs to make sure that they explicitly point out the steps concepts to serve that makes it more efficient for students. So sometimes they show them a couple of ways of working through the problem, but it's really honing in on the key concepts that are needed to for that worked example. And then the last question 4, was which technologies are you already familiar with to support the work of worked examples in your classroom or district? And of course, there are many. I know it's kind of an exhaustive list, but I put in just a few that we have, which are Edpuzzle, Show Me, Screencastify. You can make your own worked examples through YouTube or Pear Deck, and then just showing some explanations through Zern, Khan Academy, or Google Slides. So just a multitude of different ways that you can include it. The second part of the questions are there other technologies that you have that you'd like to learn or integrate? And that's where Stephanie comes in for us. It's just how we can integrate some of those other technologies within the classroom. I'm sure there are millions.
And then 2 of the EDU protocols that were listed, the first one is Convince Me That. This one, I teach math, so I think it applies to me a lot, is you just give a problem, and I just pulled the examples that I think Stephanie had already created. And you just have a template, and on each slide, there's a different problem, and it already has the answer on it. So then the kids have to go back through and convince their classmates or the teacher that that really is the answer. One thing I can think of for like 6th grade math is the distributed property. Kids never understand that. So if they're given the answer and then have to kind of work backwards to prove why that answer is, that kind of might help them retain that information a little bit better. And then the other one is the internet scavenger hunt. I think this one kind of applies more to like ELA or science and social studies, where the research is involved. So kids are given different questions. This was a science one. What are 3 similarities between plant and animal cells? And then they have to have evidence to support their answer. So the teacher is going to help them go through to help them or learn how to, I guess, explore the internet or find the relevant answers to the questions and where to pull in that important information, and not just doing random searches to find whatever pops up first. So actually getting them to research correctly.
And then with the breakdown, they did the goal, strategy, and tool paradigm. We put to recognize and represent proportional relationships between quantities, and then you could use the worked example using Edpuzzle as a way to kind of break out and show the key concept with all of these, and why we included both is it's not just showing the worked example, but it's practicing immediately afterwards. So that was key, is to interweave practice with the worked example. So not just, what normally happens in a traditional classroom is we would, do a couple practice examples and then kids go off on their own to do it. This would be allowing them to kind of work at their own pace and get their own kind of support by showing the worked example, then doing the practice, and then following that up with another worked example. So that's what you have in our examples on the next slide as well. So we did an elementary and a middle school version. And so from the elementary version, I just did understanding how to add fractions on a number line and how you would show the worked examples using the Show Me app and Edpuzzle. And then again, just like I said, you would show the students and then give them an opportunity to practice. But in the Show Me part, it's really making sure that you add the key vocabulary, the key thought processes, and then making sure that students had that ability to practice. And then again, you could start off with having them listen, but then later on, to increase the rigor, students could actually be identifying what if you give them an incorrect work example, then they could identify the problem or the incorrect solution.
And then for the middle school, it was recognize and represent proportional relationships. So having just 4 different stations, one with an Edpuzzle video, and with the Edpuzzle video, having, I think some of the previous groups had mentioned, putting the questions in at relevant times. So not doing, 3 examples of a problem and then putting the questions in, but show an example on an Edpuzzle video and then put a question in so kids actually have to work it out. And then the teacher can show the answer, and just alternating a few of those in there, but not too much to overload them. and then have a teacher station where it's on paper, and then the Jamboard could be the convince me. So each kid could have their own slide on the Jamboard, and they could go through and explain why the answer is what it is. And then they could also check their other like classmates' work to go back and, you know, talk to each other and improve and make comments on each other's slides. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Matt and Jen, for helping us understand worked examples. All right, next up we have chapter 10.
Hi, that's me. We are doing self-assessment, chapter 10. And if you go to the next slide, it is me. I'm first grade, choosing first grade for the first time this year, coming from second. And my partner was Todd Stanley. He is teaching a gifted summer school program today. So you just get me, although Todd has put some fun videos in for you guys too. So. All right, so our effect size is actually one of the highest I think that we've seen today so far, 1.33, it's about 3 years growth according to the book if it's done with fidelity. So it's a big one. And I'll let Todd start out. Our first question was, research has found when students have frequent opportunities to self-assess, they begin to attribute their learning to internal beliefs. Why would that be important?
So research has found that when students have frequent opportunities to self-assess, they begin to attribute their learning to internal beliefs. This goes along with the Carol Dweck idea of growth mindset as opposed to fixed mindset. So in other words, when students are looking at their flaws and their strengths and what they could have done better and what they did really well, they start to understand how effort goes into that and how it's not just about innate ability, but it's about the work that you put in as well. And this is really important for creating a couple things, such as drive and grit, where students realize that if something is tough, that they can overcome it if they give effort, as opposed to just giving up because they don't know it. And so this is going to allow students, being able to self-assess is going to be really important. Think about sports. When they're out doing something in sports, they're not always going to have their coach to tell them what to do. And so athletes have to learn how to self-assess and make adjustments. And students need to do the same. They need to figure out, okay, I don't need the teacher to tell me what I'm not doing well or what I'm doing well. I need to figure it out myself. And I need to self-assess myself and then move on past that.
All right. And then Todd also had our second question. What prevents teachers from allowing students to self-assess? I think he is at NASA, but I'm not sure.
What stops or prevents a teacher from allowing students to self-assess? And there are several things, but I think three that really stand out. The first one is some teachers are afraid that students are going to inflate their grade. In other words, they're not going to be honest. They're going to give themselves A's when they deserve F's and so on and so forth. But in my personal experience in using self-assessment, I always say that students usually are tougher on themselves because they understand the entire picture. They know what they did and did not do better than the teacher who only can observe them at certain glimpses at a time. So I have found that actually to be very rare where a student will inflate the grade, and instead students are pretty tough on themselves. And so you have to kind of get them to not be so hard on themselves. And part of that is giving them expectations and protocols that they can use when doing self-assessments and giving them, examples that they can also turn to. The second thing that people might be worried about, teachers might be worried about, is that someone considers self-assessment that's not objective or measurable. But at the same time, and I would argue that teacher observation is very measurable or objective. So you see something and you make note of that, and that becomes a formative assessment that you can use for students to determine whether they're getting something or not. In this case, students, again, are going to have a pretty decent idea of what they are capable of, and they're going to, and so it's their observation. It may be their opinion, but at the same time, it's giving you some insight to something maybe you don't see. So you can combine the student observation and your observation to kind of create a assessment overall. So it's kind of a self and a teacher assessment kind of put together. A third reason why teachers might be worried or not want to self-assess is basically it comes down to fear of giving students too much control. I'm not saying this in a negative way necessarily. As teachers, we are given the task of being the ones in charge, the adult who is responsible, the one who is, responsible for anything from giving grades to homework to attention to whatever. And so sometimes it can be difficult to give over that control sometimes. I know I struggled with it when I did project-based learning at first, but then you learn that the more control you give your students, the better that they are going to perform, because they feel like part of the process. They feel like they have some skin in the game, a say-so in the matter. It's not just being determined. So I never wanted a student to say to me, well, Stanley gave me a C in that class. I wanted them to say, I earned a C in that class, because they are part of this, this decision-making. And so being able to self-assess sees that you trust them to be able to assess themselves.
So, and then Todd has included a couple examples. I don't know that we'll play these videos. I don't know, I'm short on time, but talking about student self-assessment with peers as well, using assessment rubrics and things that we've all done in the past as well. So that's one of his examples of a self-assessment rubric, and you can check out that video on your own as well.
Hear it.
I don't know. I'm like, I don't know if we have time for all of them. I don't know. We can keep going. The next one we have is another example of how you can see the data from those kids. And you'll see as we get into some of the other slides as well, that one of the biggest takeaways I think from this chapter is that a lot of times we put self-assessment at the end. Okay, your assignment is done, and reflecting back on that, but making it more of a big picture where kids can reflect on the whole. So this would be an example of a way where a kid can see that progress themselves. All right. And then question 3 was self-assessment is about more than just exit tickets. When we put exit tickets into the virtual space, what must children be able to see and do in order for true self-assessment to exist? And so obviously the big takeaway, more than just exit tickets, but those digital tools allow these students to have a deeper understanding of their own proficiency or lack thereof. And the biggest thing is by measuring themselves against proficiency. So a lot of this ties in really well with some of modern teacher, some of you might be doing, and thinking about success criteria and ensuring that the students know what that proficiency looks like so that they can compare themselves against that. And then the book also talked about comparing themselves against their peers. Is it something that's happening where they are not progressing at the same rate as their classmates? Are they not putting forth the same effort? They can draw those conclusions about what their learning looks like because they have that clear path, which is that they can reflect on how to improve. And then through all of these things, they become more empowered of their own learning, and that ownership naturally is going to lead them to become better learners. So we've got this quote that really drives that home. The exit tickets are not the door to move on to the next lesson. Rather, they are a window into how to teach the next one. So they give us those details. Question 4 asked us to clarify the self-assessment cycle, beginning, middle, and end. So we've got the hamburger, not the same one from the last group, but the hamburger icon, our image here talks about how we want to start with clear expectations and those success criteria or the standard, and making sure the students know where they're headed and that it's very clear right from the jump. Then students have to engage in that self-assessment to reflect on changes in the middle of the process. So rather than waiting until the goals have been complete or we've wrapped up the unit, we need to stop within the unit itself and allow students to reflect on their progress through teacher-guided dialogue. And I think at the elementary level, there's a lot of, give me a thumbs up if you're with me, at least in my classroom, those quick and informal modes of assessment, but also using some more intentional strategies and allowing the kids to see that progress as a class, which we'll look at in our examples. And then finally, the students apply their understanding on that final task. All right, so these were our Edu protocols. Poll everywhere. I have not used this one, so this was recommended in the book, and I don't know a whole lot about it, but it's because it seems to be geared toward the older grades. I haven't experimented with it myself, but it is a tool that allows teachers to take those quick answers to questions and gather data about their class in a quick and efficient way, similar to maybe Kahoot or quizzes and some of the others, depending on how you're using it. One that I particularly liked was Things That Rock. I'd never heard it called that, but it was really easy and quick. So I just threw in an example, if you want to open that up, on Jamboard, where you could put any question. And some of the examples were to have a thumbs up and a thumbs down, or you could have a stance on a topic. And then the kids join the Jamboard and drag their chip to one side of the scale. You could do, a lot of things with this. And then the other piece that I thought was interesting in the text was there was a lot of discussion about the benefits of allowing students to be anonymous versus taking ownership. So being intentional about including both, because yes, sometimes we want students to feel comfortable having that anonymity, but at other times there is a point where they do have to have some accountability for their own work. So I thought that was a really great point as well. If you want to, yep. And then this was another Edu protocol that's Todd included. I keep wanting to say Stanley. His last name is throwing me off. Sorry. Todd included using a Google form where you can get quick answers, obviously, and tweak and manipulate this to work right for your classroom, especially in those older grades. I think this is one that we're all pretty familiar with. And then quizzes is similar to Kahoot. I was using quizzes the first half of the year because it was more friendly for virtual learning initially, although Kahoot did catch up in a lot of ways. But you can show the kids, and this was the big one, showing them the report as a class and really analyzing and having discussion about strengths and weaknesses and making that self-assessment connection tie in. Okay, well, this vocabulary term was really difficult for our class as a whole. Maybe I'm getting those questions right and I know, okay, I'm feeling successful, I'm keeping in line with my peers. Or if you're noticing those trends, that the kids can be part of that conversation and hopefully make some deeper understanding about their own learning. And it could be done with individual students as conferencing as well. All right, and our goal, strategy, tool paradigm, this came right from the book. It was a high school lesson, so I won't spend a ton of time going into detail, but they were working on comparing, contrasting likenesses and differences and using polls everywhere to gather that data and then sharing that. And you can see that the data will come in real time. So they would talk about having the dashboard maybe projected in the screen and having class conversation about how the class is learning as a whole and progress toward their goals. And last but not least, our bold school framework, the high school one, again, is the one I just mentioned. I won't go into details because it is in the book. But elementary, I threw in an example of working with one of our biggest math standards, adding and subtracting with regrouping, and how we could use almost those worked examples that the last group talked about to solve a problem together, share different exemplars from the class. And then after that group conversation, students could use that quick Jamboard, things that rock, and drag their token to their understanding or the strategies that made the most sense to them and reflect on their understanding of that math process as well. And I think that's it. I probably talked really fast, but thanks, guys.
Good job, Erin and Todd virtually joining in from NASA or Mars. I don't know where he was. Okay, we're going to take another quick break. We're going to do 3 minutes, and then we will have 3 more presentations. And then after that, we will talk about individual projects. All right, and as we're waiting for our next two, for chapter 11, I'm going to go ahead and spin another name for a free EduProtocol book. All right, Katie James, and again, I will email you either today or tomorrow to ask you which book you would like. Chapter 11, whenever you're ready. I think it's Patty and Pam. Yes, Pam.
All right, looks like Patty might not be back quite yet, but we'll go ahead and get started. Go ahead and, oh, there she is.
Sorry.
I'm Pam. I'm a high school teacher at North.
I'm Patty. I am now a social studies teacher at Lakeview. So the effect size, I know we've talked a lot about that today. It is 0.74, and we know the zone of desired effect is greater than 0.4. So we're getting close to that, double range. So this is a good strategy. So our first question was, which of the descriptors below best describes reciprocal teaching, and what makes you think so? Defend your response. So it really was described in the chapter as being a close reading strategy. And it's a close reading strategy that has 4 distinct steps. And students have opportunities to predict, clarify, question, and summarize. The strategy is cooperative learning, and that students support each other, and that then they trade levels of responsibility. So ideally, each student has the opportunity to do each of these jobs. And it's really important that, as with any of these strategies, that you give, that you train students for this strategy. So, maybe you want to take time just to train everyone on how to be the predictor. Then you train everyone on how to be the clarifier, and that you provide sentence starters for each of those levels. And then, although reciprocal teaching sounds like it's a reading strategy, it's not just for ELA. And it's used for every discipline, and they emphasize in the chapter, we are all literacy teachers. So what does literacy look like in your subject area? And then you use and adapt the strategy for your subject area. And then the next question talked about, go to YouTube and find a video example of reciprocal teaching that you believe best represents the process. And did you find any non-examples in your search? How would you coach those teachers? So there was a gambit of videos. So the first one that's labeled in pink, that is an over 39-minute video. So we won't watch that whole 39-minute video. So if you really want to kind of watch it from beginning to end, that is a great one. And the second one is probably a really good one to watch. It's only about 2 minutes. So we can watch that one, Stephanie, if you want. And
sentences to make sure you're
Am I good to play it?
Yeah, go ahead. Just watch. Doesn't sound like the audio's working for some reason.
All I have is music.
Oh, well, that's okay. So you get the gist of it. It kind of walks through each of the roles. So this one's student geared, and kind of walks through each of the roles and gives even some sentence starters of what each of the roles would do. So that's probably good, Stephanie. Thank you.
And then the other is another little just short video. We don't have to watch it, but you can also watch that on your own time. And then as far as any non-examples, a lot of the videos that are posted are like for instructional purposes. So I really didn't find, as exemplars. So I didn't find a lot of the non-examples or any actually non-examples. And as far as coaching, I would first coach the teacher on training students and then continue with training and facilitation and gradual release for students. And just like with any strategy, kind of doing with guided practice, the I do, we do, you do kind of thing. Definitely provide scaffolds for students who need additional supports. I always like to have like a little tent or something or a paper in front of them of what are some questions you could ask or supports that you could use. I think Mike's group did a really good job of showing some of the training that you could use. What does our group work look like? Those kind of things would also be really important.
Question 3 dealt with the step 3, which was questioning, and it talks about asking or giving the kids stems for support. And the 3 in the book that were given was one that's right there, where it's easy for them to look at the passage and find the answer. Another one would be an in your opinion question. And then the third one would be a critical thinking, where they'd have to incorporate one of the vocabulary words they had learned in step 2. A couple additional supports would be a compare and contrast that they could incorporate, or what do you feel is most important, least important? As a math teacher, is there any information that's not needed type question for them to dissect the passage or the word problem or whatever they're working on, and identifying the questions. But the reason it's important to give the stems is to make sure that they are developing higher level thinking questions and they're not all just at a level 1 question. And then for question 4, reciprocal teaching can be used in any discipline. We often think of this as an ELA type strategy only, but it really can be used in anything and should be, because again, we are all literacy teachers. For example, we may use this as a word problem as a math teacher, but you can also use it looking at photos. It could be small passages. It could be an audio book for the younger kids. Regardless of the material you're using, you're going to go through those 4-step processes with each one. So if I was a math class and I was using it, I would break down the word problem by first identifying important information or having the kids go through and identify what they think might be important, classifying significant versus insignificant information. They could question any vocabulary that they don't understand in the word problem. They could write questions for their peers of what steps they think they should do, and then together solve it and explain the process that they use to solve it.
So our protocols were Curiosity Creator and Iron Chef. I had Curiosity Creator. And it's basically a variation of Notice and Wonder. It's a very simple protocol. And you could use it with a picture, video clips, a series of items, text, etc. And then if you go back through the presentation and you click on here, you can see in our notes, we've linked back to what Stephanie had in our path and for Iron Chef. And then I also linked what See, Think, Wonder, an example of that is, since it's a variation kind of on that. I would use it with a group of 4 to 5 students. They could collaboratively complete a slide. You could make it in a Jamboard. You could make it in slides. And then, each group member could fill it in as part of their job. However, whatever media that you're choosing to have them use the protocol with.
Iron Chef being similar, having some type of Google slide where each of the 4 steps were broken up into a slide, and they can either collectively or individually as a group be assigned a slide to work on to complete the 4-step process.
So for the goal strategy tool paradigm, for our SMART goal, students will correctly answer 7 out of 10 comprehension questions within 40 minutes after reading a grade level text of 1,000 words or less, and a Lexile to not exceed 1,200. So that's like a 7th, 8th grade ELA goal based on the Ohio State tests. So the plan would be explain the reciprocal teaching as a strategy, describe the roles, use a reading piece that's interesting and relevant. So anytime you're using, trying to teach one of these strategies, I think it's recommended that you use something simple to start, that's maybe not your content or something that's interesting for students. So I thought this might be something that's interesting to students would be TikTok is sued for billions over use of children's data. So we could use Edpuzzle video to reinforce what the reciprocal teaching is, with questions for formative assessment to make sure they understand like what each of the jobs are. We would do modeling, do a think aloud as each role. Again, I do, we do, you do. And tools, poster of roles, expectations for collaborative work, handouts with questions, sentence starters for each role, and practice for students in each role. And we have a middle school and a high school standard. So for mine, I assume that we've already practiced this strategy more than once. So the lesson would basically be students are investigating the Boston Massacre by analyzing a variety of primary and secondary resources from various perspectives. The why is to determine bias, corroboration, sourcing, etc. And then our assessment later would be during a Socratic seminar, students will make and defend a claim as to whether the massacre is an appropriate term for the event, whether they agreed with the outcome of the trial. So the strategy, meanwhile, is reciprocal teaching. Our digital tools would be slides and Jamboard. And then they're going to do various station rotations to go through the primary sources and secondary sources. So they're actually going to go through the strategy multiple times. So the prediction will be just using, there's an iconic lithograph of the Boston of the massacre, and then a headline. So they'll predict, was this really a massacre? And then go through this with their group through various resources, do predict, clarify, question, summarize, and then after going through the various resources, kind of come up with a final summary. And then, like I said, it was built on the assumption that this has been practiced several times, and then they would have graphic organizers or some kind of concept maps to, along the way, and then do the final assessment.
For the high school example, I had done a word problem one earlier, so I decided to do something a little different and take similar figures. And after we've discussed similar figures and scale factors, having the kids then work through the 4-step process to evaluate what would happen for the perimeter, the area, and the volume of the similar figures. It would give them a chance to predict, to ask any clarifying questions with any formulas they may need if they don't know the area, volume, of whatever figures in front of them, and then to be able to then question their peers. What do they think the steps they would need to do to be able to find the relationship between the scale factor and the similar figures for their perimeter, area, and volume, and then actually go through the steps to calculate them so that they can figure out what the relationship is on the scale factor.
Stephanie, could you click the link in the notes as well? So this is a variation. I thought this reminded me a lot of this the kind of literature circle. It's on slide 11 notes. Says it's a literature circle activity, but I really think a lot of these question stems or activities in here could really be used, especially with some of the younger students. What's very similar to this activity. So you could break up these roles. So that link is in there as well. So like the heart of the matter would be like the summarize part. So you could call it something else, other than summarizer. You could, make some cuter names or activities. So that is in here as well. It's the same, a very similar activity. You get the same result. So that's there as well. So I think that's all we have.
All right, thank you. All right, next up we have chapter 12, which, yeah, it does rock, Mike, which is on problem solving teaching.
All right, I'm Sherry Orskowski. We had Bold School Chapter 12, Problem Solving Teaching.
And I'm Gina Komorowski, 3rd and 4th grade Math Plus at Fairfield and Tusing Elementary.
And I'm Sherry Orskowski, 5th grade Gateway Math Science at Tollgate. Well, this will be my first year back to math. So it was good to have something that can apply to my new subject.
The effect size for problem solving teaching is relatively high. It's a 0.63, but the book makes a point to mention that it is only a 0.63 effect size when you let the students purposefully struggle and develop tenacity along the way. Simply working with problem solving questions, strategies, and situations is not enough. The idea of problem solving teaching is to allow students to struggle and not necessarily come to the answer. It's more of the process of problem solving itself. You can't just really assign the work under the guise of problem solving and assume that they're going to understand what to do or assume that it will be useful and productive unless you've walked them through the problem solving steps first.
All right. So question 1 was, think about your current practice. Are we allowing students to struggle productively as they solve all manners of problems? And how do you know? Gina and I both talked about this she's elementary and I'm middle school, that a lot of times that productive struggle quickly becomes unproductive. If the kids are frustrated, you see them starting to become off task or wanting help immediately, not really wanting to think through the problem solving. And sometimes then the teachers will swoop in too quickly. Or the opposite can happen. Sometimes you have teachers that just say, you need to work through it, keep trying. And that can be really unproductive as well. So there has to be a balance there. And they really gave some good strategies on how to approach problem solving so that the struggle does not become unproductive, and also so that the teacher doesn't swoop in too quickly or offer too much help, but also that the teacher is there and supports them along the way. So can we go back for a second? One thing with on the side there, how can we make problem solving work in the classroom? They had some really good suggestions for that. First, that surface knowledge must be mastered first to get that full effect size. You can't just give kids a brand new standard and expect them to problem solve through something that they don't have the background knowledge to think through. So they really mentioned that the background knowledge has to be mastered first before students can struggle productively through a problem. And then, of course, the productive struggle has to happen, but there needs to be a structured process. They mention a 3-step, where you check in to make sure they found an entry point. You check back in the middle to make sure that they are coming towards the solution, and then right at the end that they're getting towards the answer. And then the third thing was that we embrace technology, because we all know with math, kids can go online, type in their problem, and there's your answer. But that we need to make sure that we're setting guidelines for technology, especially when kids are problem solving, not to eliminate, those types of apps, but then also just make sure that we're giving them guidelines. Okay.
So question 2, problem solving is a 5-step process. And so they wanted us to kind of outline what those 5 steps of problem solving teaching actually are. And so the first step is modeling problem solving. But what the teacher's actually doing is modeling the process of problem solving. You don't just work through the steps of a problem, give them the answer, and send them on their way. You need to do a lot of thinking out loud. What are the essential pieces of information we need to take from this question? What questions need answers? What tools can help me? Once you've modeled the thinking process, you want to present students with a new problem. It should be similar to the problem you just modeled for them, but not so similar that they can replicate the steps immediately, come to an answer incredibly quickly. You want them to struggle a little bit with the process itself. The third step is having a class discussion about that new problem. And that's, again, where you reinforce the problem-solving process. What initial considerations need to be made, what information needs to be cleared up before you really start getting into the heart of the problem. Step 4 is when you step back and allow them to solve the problem. And the book does mention that, solving problems individually, if that's how a student prefers, they can work in groups. Collaboration is actually something that you want to see and is very helpful, which we'll get into a little later. But when they're problem solving independently, you want to be there to provide support or guidance, but absolutely not to solve it for them. Technology would come in at this step, but the teacher needs to set parameters. What can you use? When can you use it? Because again, the process needs to be student-led at this point for them to really get that effect size. And then the final step is intervention. 3 specific rounds. Initially, you want to make sure that the students are on the right track, that they're approaching the problem correctly and not so far off in left field that they will never actually course correct and get to where they need to be. An intermediate intervention would be the scaffolding process for students who are still really struggling to get a foothold on that problem. And then the summative intervention would be to come back together as a whole class and discuss the problem-solving process. Again, not step by step, this is how you come to the answer, but letting the students talk out what exactly did they do to approach the problem.
All right, and then we had question 3, what role does discussion and collaboration play in the problem-solving teaching? What about technology? It was really important that you guide the discussion as a class about those initial considerations. So once the problem is given, that you lead a class discussion and kind of pull together as a class some general direction about where you need to go with the problem solving. We thought it would be a really good idea to partner for collaboration. I've used Context for Learning, or it's been a few years since I've taught math, but when I did, we used Context for Learning a lot. And it's just like a kit that we have with a bunch of really deep problem solving activities for kids. And I used to give each kid a color. So either if you're online, they would write in a certain color, or if you're doing something on paper, they each write in a certain color. And it just really encourages them to each include their own parts. And I think once they see their partner added a little bit more than them, it was really good for the other partner to see that. And then they would know, they needed to add a little bit more of their thinking when they're going through the problem solving. And then again, that 3 rounds of spaced intervention that we've talked about is just really crucial. for the collaboration. So the teacher is involved, the kids can collaborate, but then the teacher needs to be involved by coming in at those spaced intervention times to help the students.
Question 4, I thought was a kind of a strange one. I had a hard time with this, I'll be honest. So in the book, Weston offers Caddyshack as an exemplar for problem-solving teaching. And they asked us to, brainstorm what other book, movie, or TV show moments do you believe captures the essence of this strategy? And the one that I thought of after a long time was, I like to watch cooking shows a lot. And so the Great British Bake Off, they have a round where they call it the technical round, where the contestants are provided with a list of ingredients, but no measurements, very basic steps, and the knowledge of what the end product should be. But there's no physical example for them to see. There is nothing more than, they don't even tell them like how high to preheat their oven. It's very, very basic and rudimentary. And the contestants have to use what they know about baking and the ingredients to essentially replicate as best they can a product that they can't really see. And it does kind of emphasize the problem solving of, you have to maybe go through several iterations of whatever your product is before you get to something where you're happy with the end product.
And then Apollo 11, that scene I think is pretty much, if you've seen Apollo 11, where they need to solve the venting problem, and it's like you have around, like one part is round, one part is square. How are you going to make this work? And they have to use things that are on Apollo 11 to solve that problem. So, right.
So the two EDGE protocols that we had were the hero's journey and visual directions. With the hero's journey, you're using the actual steps of the literary trope that there is a hero's journey that all stories have a hero go through. But what you're doing is you're applying it to a new topic, a new subject. So the steps are right there. You have the call to action, the threshold, the helper, the abyss, the transformation. And what they're asking students to do is to, obviously this has applications in ELA, but if you were teaching social studies, using the hero's journey to perhaps explain the events of the American Revolution or a country's path to independence, it's forcing them to think outside the box and apply their knowledge of a topic to a set of parameters that they are possibly not very familiar with at all.
All right, and then I had visual direction. So I think this one could be used a couple different ways. So the way that this EDGE protocol was explained on the example that we were given was that you use the icons to give visual directions to students. Let them try to decide what the icons mean and what they're supposed to do, and then have them get to work. So you could use this a couple different ways. So one example, the example that I'll give on the next page is, there's an oil spill. And if we were learning about area, oh, sorry, you'll probably just go back for now. It's right on that screen there. So if you have an oil spill, maybe the visual directions I would give would be, the duck in the pond with the oil spill. Area, find a partner, show your, how you would find the area on Google Drawing. But then another way that you could use this is you could have the students come up with visual directions to try to show another partner group how to solve a problem, just using a few visuals. So they could find icons online. They could just try to use a few, like A equals for area, things like that to help them work through the problem. Kind of that idea of giving somebody else directions and seeing if they could draw something, but in this way it would be with a problem solving type problem. All right, the goal strategy tool paradigm that was given, you introduce the problem solving instructional strategy to find the area of shapes. The effect size of that strategy is 0.63. And then you could use Peer Deck for elementary, Google Draw for middle school. The one that was given in the book, I didn't include. And now that I've seen everybody else include that one, I guess I should have. It was a high school art example. And the goal there was to, what were they doing? They had to use Minecraft to create an apartment building for different cities. So each student in the class was given a different city or a different place, and they had to use Minecraft to create an apartment building. So that would be the technology tool that they were using.
So with the Bold School framework, for the elementary standard, especially with the problem-solving teaching, you don't want it to be something as simple as, find the perimeter of this rectangle, find the area of this rectangle. It would be more complex problems, like, create a rectangle with an area of 84 centimeters squared and a perimeter of 40 centimeters. So students have a problem that they really need to deconstruct before they need to find the answer. The digital tool that I chose for that would be Peer Deck. There's a lot of assumed prior knowledge, formulas for area and perimeter, multiplication facts and fluency that have to be there before they can even tackle a problem like this. But with Peer Deck, it allows for more anonymous class discussion and more anonymous ideas about problem solving, because a lot of times the idea of struggling and not actually finding the correct answer is very uncomfortable for students. The idea that the teacher is not going to step in immediately and intervene is very uncomfortable for students. So Peer Deck gives them more of an opportunity to take risks and to do so anonymously, than to raise your hand, offer a solution that may not actually fit. It gives the teacher a really good idea of, are they even going in the right direction? And it allows for the augmentation of class discussions in terms of self-assessment. The anonymity for students allows for hopefully more engagement than being put on the spot in class, and the teacher can actually get the feedback they need to not only work with the students in terms of interventions, but to see how much more practice with the problem solving they'll actually need.
And then for middle school, you could kind of follow that same idea. So I used find the area of special polygons. So the kids would already have a little bit of background on finding area of certain shapes. But if you were given an unusual shape like that of an oil spill, how could you find the area of that unusual shape? So using Jamboard to draw in some of that discussion, and then using Google Draw and some of the shapes on Google Draw where they could overlay to try to figure out how to find the area of an unusual shape. So going through those blended instruction, like modeling, presenting the problem to the class, having that class discussion on Jamboard, student collaboration, and then of course that spaced teacher intervention that we talked about. And then for the high school, like I said, that example they gave for the art class, I thought that was a really good one, where they used Minecraft to draw apartment buildings would be the one for that. And I think that's it. So trying to go through that one quickly.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we are at our final chapter, chapter 13, with spaced and mass practice.
Okay, I'm Katie James. I teach 6th grade math over at Harmon.
And I'm Kevin Toppy, 4th grade math and science at Violet. And we'll try to be quick because we know we've got other stuff to do.
Yeah. Our chapter was first introduced with a movie also, and they introduced it with 50 First Dates. So if you haven't seen 50 First Dates, a quick version of it is Henry meets Lucy and he felt like he really is interested in her. They have a cute little breakfast date. they go their separate ways and then they meet up the next day, but Lucy has no idea who he is because she doesn't remember anything from her short-term memory. And long story short, Henry has to create this video for her that helps her remember basically her life and her experiences that she's had before she's had this very traumatic car accident. So he shows her a little bit more about the life that they've kind of built together and shows her a little bit more about herself. So I think all of us have probably had an experience like this. I know I've had plenty where the beginning of the year in 6th grade, we go over fractions over and over and over. And it's like we practice them until they can't take it anymore. And then we get to the end of 6th grade where we're doing geometry and we're trying to find volume with fractional edges. And they look at that and they're like, I've never done that before. So spaced and mass practice is trying to alleviate some of that frustration that I know teachers feel, and I'm sure students also feel, by offering spaced practice over a substantial amount of time through station rotation. Mass practice just refers to practice where learning a concept is concentrated for a shorter amount of time, like days or weeks, and then spaced practice would be throughout the entire school year. The effect size is 0.6. So I know we've talked a little bit about how that's pretty substantial for what we want them to learn. You want to go ahead, Kevin?
Right. So the connection between spaced practice and station rotation, how they support each other, basically it kind of connects to that because spaced practice is going to probably be done more independently during a station. So when it's kind of tied into that, you can weave back into it kind of with them doing it independently rather than it taking up a lot of your instructional time. It also allows you to kind of choose how many of your stations each day or week or however you set that up are dedicated to that practice as opposed to like working with them on new content.
Our second question was, we know that repeat exposure makes learning sticky. How do you cultivate opportunities to repeat exposure while accounting for the time restraints that you have in your present school year? So they talked a lot about implementing this spaced practice through the station rotation model, both for spaced practice and mass practice, because teachers are freed from that conundrum of deciding to sacrifice time that you're presenting new material and adding in that repeated practice for older material.
And then question 3 was, how can the station rotation serve both comprehension and retention outcomes at the same time? Provides opportunities to serve comprehension and retention because a teacher-led station, comprehension of newly presented materials kind of your focus, and that can be tracked and observed closely. In collaborative stations, spaced practice can be incorporated to let students engage with previously presented materials in different ways, which shows their comprehension of the material, and then an ability to maybe apply it into a problem or something that they're doing. So the goal is to provide cognitive, rigorous ways to practice so that you can increase the length of time. So the more deeply they're working with it, you can space out those practice sessions, which then allows you to review and space out more concepts because you have the time in between reviewing one concept and another.
This question was asking like how actively you use station rotation models and then what kind of tech tools you use in support of your stations. So to be really honest, the last couple of years, I have a love-hate relationship with station rotation. Like I love parts of it. And then I'm also like, I'm still trying to figure out the best way for it to work. I've also switched content areas a few times, and this is going to be my 3rd year in math. So I feel a little bit more confident in doing a station rotation with the content that I've been in for a little while. But it's always been very hard for me to work that space practice back in. But I think that through the implementation of it in a specific station, I think would be really helpful. And I think that that would allow them to work collaboratively as well as apply it to what we're learning at the present time.
And then for myself, I've taught math and science for quite a long time. But when we adopted Eureka, I kind of was where Katie was. It took me several years to get the station rotation model going. So I do use that now. I didn't last year, but that was a whole anomaly in and of itself. But in a typical year, I do use station rotations. But I still find that in my typical or my regular math block, it's still hard to do that spaced practice because there's so many parts of Eureka that go into the stations. It's hard to kind of say what aren't they going to do from the Eureka curriculum during that math block. So a lot of my space practice activities come into my E&I time, but then not all students get that. Your students that are tiered don't get time with you during E&I, or spec ed don't. So there's kind of that struggle of how do I get that space practice into everything. I'll go ahead.
Okay. The first EDGE protocol that we had was math reps. It's a strategy that uses multiple ways to model an equation or multiple math skills with a certain number. So these can be used whole group, centers, and a station. It can be in small group instruction or as an assessment. So really any of the stations, whatever you implement. It also is easy to differentiate and to scaffold to meet the needs of all of your students. Steph, I don't know if you want to have time to just look at where they are. So we have them broken up into grade bands. I only looked at the 6th through 8th one because that was what I was more interested in looking at in the 6th grade one. But what I would do, I know I love using Jamboard, but for a spaced practice, I would probably take a screenshot of this and put it on like a Google slide so that each kid could have their own differentiated one. But these are really great just math practice to go back, and they're all a little bit different. So I really liked these.
And then the Right Bites is, I think we might have done this one a little bit in our first class, if I remember right, but they take a visual picture and it's kind of set up like an array. But a lot of the ones I saw might have been like an array, but with one part missing. And they write the equation like several different ways, and then they have to write a word problem based on the picture. I think these, especially Katie and I talked, even at the middle school level, probably really hard. They're probably going to be more for an enrichment activity for certain kids. I have a hard enough time getting kids to realize what multiplication and division problems come from an array. So, and then when you take a piece out of it and they have to write some, higher level sentence, that's probably going to be more of an enrichment. But it is something maybe at the high school level for sure, where they're writing equations different ways for the same value that they could use. So. And then our goal strategy tool paradigm was, for example, students will perform multi-digit multiplication with 80% accuracy by the end of the school year. You're obviously going to have your math practice as you get to those lessons in your math curriculum, but then we need the space practice to maintain that skill. So mine's actually at the bottom. The tool I would possibly use for that, we call them weekly fours. We do, and it's basically just an operation with each of the four, but it would include your multiplication practice, and then they would check it with, the opposite operation to check it, but it's that weekly practice of that skill that they continue to come back to week after week once they've learned it.
Yeah, and then GimKit is another fast, fun game that just presents questions quickly. I typically use this one more for fact fluency, but it can be used with really any content because you can create your own questions, and then there's tons of sets that you can use for really anything. They're all great.
And then for the Bold School framework, the elementary example was subtracting to millions with multiple regroupings with 80% accuracy again. The goal obviously is the space versus math practice. A digital tool you could use this as Kahoot during a station rotation. So you might have your teacher instruction on a current topic, the Kahoot with the practice of subtraction that you've previously math taught, and then maybe a pencil paper activity with the current topic. So they're getting current topics in 2 of their stations, and then a space practiced on subtraction in 1 station. The rigor is obviously they're performing a high-level subtraction work if they're doing multiple regroupings, and it's independent from the mass instruction that had happened previously in your modules.
For middle school, I just made one for students fluently dividing decimals using a long division algorithm, especially using spaced and mass practice. I know we do a lot of it at the beginning of the year when we first introduce it, and then we don't really go back to it as often. So incorporating that space practice for that would really keep it fresh in their mind. Digital tools that we could implement for it in a station rotation could be quizzes or Google Forms, or Edpuzzle if they needed just a recap on what they were supposed to do. Kind of the same for station rotation, small group teacher led for the current topic, where then they could have an Edpuzzle, an exploration for that current topic in another station, and then space practice incorporation into an independent student station. The rigor is students are applying previously learned skills and revisiting those skills through space practice throughout the entire school year. Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you for helping us jigsaw all those chapters and all those instructional strategies. So hopefully at this point you are feeling inspired and are thinking about one of those instructional strategies that you want to focus on. So in our Google Classroom, down in those individual projects, they are on that first slide, all of those EduProtocols, all the slides, all the videos, everything is going to be linked on here. So once you decide on which chapter you want to focus, which instructional strategy, feel free to use that to help you on your individual projects. And then Stephanie, if you would go ahead and click on that individual project one. So these will be due August 6th. You are going to take that Bold School lesson planning, and there are, on that template, there are places to put 3 lesson plans. So you are going to go out, choose one instructional strategy, and then create 3 separate lessons to use. Then on August 6th, we will come back together and we will share those instructional strategies, your lesson plans with each other. So then you get to beg, borrow, and steal everyone else's great ideas. So, and there is a choice board. Stephanie's got some great information there for you on how you can self-assess also.
Quick question, Angie. Yeah. As an administrator, do I need to make a lesson that is from the vein of a teacher, or can I make it as like sort of a PD from the administrator's standpoint?
I would say make it something you would actually use and do some PD that you could use with your staff.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so if you, Stephanie, go back to our Google Classroom and go all the way up to the top. And then the Ashland University registration. I want to give you a quick reminder, registration, if you want to take this for Ashland University credit, closes tomorrow. So if you want to take it for Ashland credit, please get registered by tomorrow. And currently I have Ralph, Aaron, Matt, Shannon, Caitlin, Clay, Deb, Aaron, Kevin, and Pam signed up. So if you think you signed up and I didn't say your name, go out to Ashland, check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. I can help you out with the Ashland University credit option. Any other questions, guys?
And there's a question in the chat. Should the 3 lessons all use the same strategy?
Yes, so choose one strategy to really focus on and build 3 lessons using that same strategy. Feel free to use any EduProtocols that you'd like, or go out and find other things that inspire you also.
Should the 3 lessons, Angie, be like a sequential unit, or can they be 3 standalone lessons?
Whatever way you would prefer. They could be 3 sequential, or it could be 3 standalones, however works for you.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Yes, this recording, I believe, Stephanie, are you going to place it on those slides?
Yeah, I'm going to, okay, I'll share my screen again. So every single strategy has like a roadmap. I'm going to link all of the videos here at the exact timestamp. So that probably won't be done until tomorrow. I'm hoping to do that first thing in the morning, but I will have the video uploaded tonight if you want to go through the whole thing. But tomorrow it will have each of the different timestamps. So if you just want to watch interactive video, it will be linked and you just have to watch that portion of the video.
If you know Stephanie at all, by tomorrow morning, she means 4:30 a.m. Just
No,
saying.
it'll be 9 a.m.
All right, guys. Any other questions for us? Please feel free, email any of us. It may take us, 24 to 48 hours to get back to you because I know we are all heading off on our summer sabbatical also, but I will happily answer email to help you out in any way I can. So have a great summer, guys. Can't wait to see you in August.
Have a good one.